using 2022 capital levy dollars. We're going to replace about 1,600 security cameras, update visitor entry access systems, and install anti-intruder window coverings. Our largest bucket is $317 million for building modernization, which includes replacing or repairing roofs at 27 of our sites, updating heating, ventilation, cooling, plumbing, exterior walls, and windows at 26 of our sites, supporting continued investments across our district for the $1.3 billion worth of assets for our community. This aligns well with the City of Sammamish Climate Action Plan that was passed in December of 2023, as a lot of this goes to support the initiatives within the Clean Buildings Act. This also adds much needed high school capacity to address the severe overcrowding at Skyline and Issaquah high schools. I won't talk much about this project because we had a joint meeting where we did talk about this, but do want to mention that the 2016 bond had projections for a high school in that with the time having 5,254 high school students, and this year we open with more than 5,700 high school students. We're projected to have more than 6,500 high school students within the next 12 years. The new high school will provide immediate relief to the 850 students who are currently in portables who will not currently benefit from our safety and security measures that we're investing in this year. It also includes $78.6 million for high school innovation and career preparation. This will allow for rapid implementation of focused career clusters at every one of our high schools, so every student has the opportunity to graduate with a diploma and credential. You see examples of this here. This will increase access and opportunity for our graduates to find meaningful employment after high school, whether they're part of that 60% of our students who go on directly to four-year college or not. And I want to say that again to really highlight that. So while we're proud of the 60% of students that go directly on to a four-year college, we do want to make sure we provide equal opportunity for the 40% of students who choose not to do that. Lastly, we want to make sure that we are investing in accessibility for our play spaces for every one of our students. We believe and hear strong community support for maintaining our athletic field spaces. So it does include lighting at Beaver Lake Middle School. It includes replacing the turf and fields at Skyline High School as well as Pine Lake Middle School. The cost is 29 cents per 100,000 assessed value. It's structured to have a stable tax rate with a projected rate of $3.42 per 1,000, which is lower than our 20-year previous average of $3.91. It works out to about $1.20 per day for a home assessed at $1.5 million. And wanted to last show you one thing. This is the 98074 in blue and the 98075 in orange, and it shows you the variance over the past 20 years of property values from home sales in Sammamish. And I do believe that continued investments in supporting schools through bond passage has resulted in this widening gap that you see. In Issaquah, we have passed every bond in the past 20 years. Lake Washington has passed 2 out of the past 5. On our website, we have information, lots of it. And I did provide the handout to you, which is front and back as well. I skipped over slides in order to honor the time I will give to your clerk, which shows the interest savings that we have done on behalf of our residents and collective taxpayers, which has saved them well over $100 million over the past decade.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Stickney?
Is on. Hello, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. Tonight I'm going to talk about a topic that is hard to talk about for some, which is potentially increasing housing supplies of types of house we need and addressing local imbalance of housing supply. So I'm going to hand out a citizen initiative motion at the end of this. So I'm going to present this comment in the shape of a motion from me and then speaking to it. I'd like to suggest that the city add 5,000 market rate units to the 2024 comp plan in addition to the 100% affordable housing regional growth target of 2,100. Speaking to that motion, doing this will be a significant first step towards meeting long-standing citywide housing imbalances in Sammamish for needs that exist and threaten to persist within our city if they're not addressed. The regional target of 2,100 is a radically different number than citywide housing imbalance numbers are. They come from totally different sources. The internal needs, and I know this is staggering, and I don't mean to shock anybody, but for the research I've done, I think our community needs over 10,000 to up to 26,000, and I'm not advocating for those kinds of numbers. I just think that's what the research shows. I'm suggesting adding 5,000 this cycle. Most of these would be market rate units priced from 500,000 to $1.4 million. They'd be achieved by means of development regulations and city codes. Some of the 5,000 would be priced for some condos and townhomes over 1.4. And by the way, affordable housing is very well handled under the King County target. The vast majority of the added market rate units would be located in about 5% of the city, which are the 3 existing centers, town center sub-area, future centers, and sub-areas. Very little additional housing would be focused in existing neighborhoods, about 95% of the city. This action will start the process to round out our city housing supplies while not increasing the size of our circle of housing. We would more get housing in line with economic, demographic, and workforce needs, and focusing on meeting housing needs for cycle of life and the legacy of future generations. Also, during the 2024 comp plan, the city would undertake quantifying actual need internally far more than we have, and consider how much more to add in future comp plans. So I will hand this out.
Thank you. And Mary Wichter?
Good evening, Council. Mary Wichter, Sammamish for 24 years. I did send in something on your consent agenda number 9 tonight for 212th Avenue Southeast that goes from Ebright Creek Park down and up the hill. I had, just in researching stormwater, I had read an article in 2000, the millennium, when the city just started. And at that point, they had actually raised the road 2 feet at that time because there'd been flooding. So I just wanted to make sure that you and city staff and the engineers had that, because even Don Jaron, as longest term city council, hadn't remembered it about a year ago when I found that article, but I thought it was appropriate to send in for tonight for the consent agenda. Just as background. And then I'm going to speak on the 2024 comp plan here. First, I want to thank David Pyle and the staff and the consultant who've been working on the comp plan. I think they're doing a really good job. I had pretty much focused on critical areas on the July 20, the last meeting in July. And so tonight I went and I did all the searches again that I did before, and here's some of the things I found. The word bog or bogs does appear, which I think is okay. It's a subset of wetlands, but specifically bogs themselves are not critical areas. So I think that should be one place that sphagnum bogs are mentioned, because we have quite a few in this city. They're extremely rare, and you don't know about them unless you read in stormwater code. So I'd suggest that be a change. Also, geologically hazardous areas are what the state calls them for critical areas. Instead of using different versions of that, I think that should be constant. I also do not like the 2 places that they're called natural geologic hazards. They're geologic hazards whether they're natural, old, young, created legally, created illegally, or whatever. Just the word naturally needs to go, because it's a little misleading. It doesn't match any of the GMA's critical area stuff. There's a word ravine. Ravines used to be protected in the King County Non-Point Action Plan, which is from 1994, which we adopted. They were done under P-subs, which were kind of how you deal with more sensitive areas. Ravines don't really exist as protection anymore. Ravines are usually super steep. They usually don't carry water because they were gouged out by the glaciers as they came and went, but they can have protection, usually by steep slopes. And they also tend to be places that we don't put houses that we can save trees, and wildlife corridors can be. So ravines are good to have, but they're not particularly critical areas. And then I just wanted some, like ravines and wetlands. Wetlands are where it's flat, ravines are where it's steep. So instead of doing a slash, it should be a comma or an and sign, and I think a comma works well. On steep slopes, there are occurrences in them. It's mostly where it's labeled. There did used to be a map for steep slopes in the first comp plan, but due to lack of a legend, it wasn't really helpful. But I still think we need to recognize steep slopes, because if you recognize steep slopes, you can save 100% of your trees, because that's how the tree order. But if you don't recognize them, then it's only 25 or 35% of the trees that get saved. And then I think seismic hazards should be in place. So I sent in the updates. I emailed them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any more comment in the room?
Hi there. Good evening. My name is Paul Quinn. I live in Sammamish. I'm speaking to you as an individual that cares about recycling and composting and reducing what we send to the landfill. Let's start with a reminder: 2/3 of our trash can actually be recycled or composted. When I speak of diversion rates, that means the percent of disposed tonnage diverted away from the landfill and to recycling and food scraps composting. I provided you with 4 handouts by email. The first handout in Table 3 shows Sammamish's updated diversion rate year-to-date through June is down about 1% versus year-to-date 2023. And as important as the top graphic of the handout indicates, Sammamish's diversion rate has only gotten worse since 2021. Sammamish's 2030 Climate Action Plan diversion goal is 70%. And that gap indicates this city needs a new, innovative approach to improve diversion rates to achieve the city's 2030 goal. Handout number 2 provides several specific recommendations for improving diversion rates. In addition, I'm pleased to recommend a pilot program called Smart Disposal to help significantly improve the city's diversion rate. The cost of the pilot program is approximately $200,000. Handout number 3 outlines how Smart Disposal works in some detail. I'll also now briefly describe what Smart Disposal is. Smart Disposal weighs each container emptied by the hauler for each single-family home. This system, through a postcard mailed back to each resident, provides data specific to the resident based on their address, including a landfill diversion rate per pickup and a trend line over time. I provided handout number 4 to show an example postcard report residents would receive. This system helps us move from a toss and forget mindset towards making better choices. We all know that feedback through measurement works because our water, electricity, and gas, they're all metered, and they help us moderate our use. Smart Disposal effectively meters our actual use of the disposal utility. During the pilot, the city will work with its hauler and a limited set of residents to demonstrate the effectiveness in Smart Disposal and significantly improving diversion rates. And I'm happy to meet with city staff to review how the pilot works and provide detailed information of the budgeted cost and activities in the project. People in the city of Sammamish want to live sustainably. They need the tools and leadership of this council and innovative approaches to help them increase their rates of recycling and composting. Join me in implementing a Smart Disposal pilot, and let's get our diversion rate moving to achieve our Climate Action Plan target. Thank you.
Thank you. And do we have any comments online?
Per the new reasonable accommodation, those who had pre-registered by 3 o'clock today, please raise your hand if you wish to give testimony. We had 1 pre-registrant left here. go ahead and comment. Thank you.
Hello, council members. My name is Aditi Kumarappan, and thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. I am a senior at Skyline High School. I'm also co-leader of the Sammamish team at Sustainability Ambassadors, which is a youth-led nonprofit organization with a vision to rapidly advance a sustainable future. I have lived in Sammamish my whole life, and I'm sure it's no surprise to all of you that climate change is underway. And as sustainability ambassadors, we are firm believers that change starts small and we can fight climate change together. And so when we learned that Sammamish is one of the only cities in our area to have not adopted a climate action plan yet, the group and I decided to take action. And as an ambassador and a co-chair of the city's community advisory group, I was part of the force to ensure that this plan was adopted. And the information included in the CAP is very important. And it includes goals such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 96% by 2050, transitioning to 100% renewable energy, and reducing vehicle miles traveled by 50%. It's a comprehensive roadmap that aligns our city's efforts with state and regional initiatives to ensure that we set targets and have the strategic actions necessary to achieve them. And without funding these initiatives outlined in the document, our ability to effectively combat climate change and build a resilient future would be severely compromised. And so again, I would like to thank all of you for helping get this plan adopted and helping make sure that our city is more sustainable today and will be many more years in the future. However, I want to stress that creating a plan is one feat and following through with it is another. And the projects outlined in the CAP are time sensitive and must be launched quickly to see progress made. And as such, I want to continue to support the citywide initiative and emphasize the importance of funding these initiatives, which can significantly increase the environmental health of our community. And to help push forward these environmental initiatives, I also want to propose that the city set aside funds for the creation of more bike lanes, because this will greatly increase the safety of our residents, as well as offer an incentive for those residents to utilize a greener mode of transportation. And that supports the goals of the Climate Action Plan. So thank you for considering my request, and thank you for making quick progress with drafting the Climate Action Plan. And I hope to see that happen with this funding as well.
Thank you. And if that is the end of public comment,
Yep.
then I'd like to move on now to interviewing for a board position. So we do have an open board slot, and we do have an applicant who would very much like to hear from. So I'm going to guess you're Dale. I am. Oh, God, good. Okay, great. So thank you for applying. We appreciate that very much, and thank you for your interest. And I have one critical question for you, so I know you're ready. So why are you interested in serving on the Beaver Lake Management District Advisory Board? And just help us out, just to help us know more about you through the answer.
Primarily, it's been 35 years. We've been there 35 years, and so we've been blessed. And if there's a way our grandchild could have our home and pass down to their grandchildren, it's just a jewel of a lake. And I thank the county, the city, the state, a lot of individuals who worked very hard, at least for the 35 years we've been there, to maintain the quality of Beaver Lake. About 12 years ago, the barricade issue came up, and one of the representatives, I don't recall his name, from the city, came to our community club meeting. And this is pretty much a quote. He said, "Beaver Lake is all the country we have left, and we have to do everything we can to protect that country." I haven't done anything officially since the early 90s. I was involved pretty heavily with the Beaver Lake Community Club and working with Pacific Properties, the developers of Trossachs and Beaver Lake Estates, helping them get those plats approved. And it was a real different time back then. And so, you know, protecting the lake, and thank goodness for those barricades. It's that's why I want to join the board, so I can add my values to continuing
the health of this lake.
Well, thank you very much. And at this time, it would be appropriate for us to go ahead and do a quick vote. All in favor of appointing Dale to, I want to say Johnson, is that correct?
It's Anderson.
Anderson, sorry. Dale Anderson to the Beaver Lake Management Board, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Aye. Well, congratulations. By acclamation and 100% vote, you're on board.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Council.
And no, thank you, actually.
Deputy Mayor Howe, could you also adopt the resolution that appoints Mr.
I
Anderson?
could.
Okay, thank you.
I move that we pass the resolution
Appointing one member to the Beaver
Appointing
Lake
Dale.
Management Advisory Board.
as to the advisory board, yes.
It's R2024-1062.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Thank you. And now we're going to be going into executive session. Carrie, could you help me understand if 15 minutes is appropriate or 10?
Mayor or Deputy Mayor, I think 10 minutes would suffice. Thank you.
Did you say 10?
Yes, 10.
Okay, great. So we'll be meeting at 7:10. Thank you.
Also, council may take action following. Thank you.
Just to clarify, council may take action. I had the mic muted. Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I think it's, oh, no, I'm a minute early.
Are you ready? Karen.
Okay, welcome back. And now we are looking for a motion, please.
Yes, I move to authorize the city manager to sign an administrative settlement related to parcel number 856-290-1390 on the Lewis Thompson Road Tightline project for access easements in the amount recommended by the city's right-of-way agent and staff.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And now let's move to the consent calendar. Does anybody need to pull anything off, or can we approve the consent calendar? I'll take a motion to approve.
Second.
Oh, I move that we approve the consent calendar.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. And we're now, let's see, to presentations and proclamations. So the first proclamation is with Welcoming Week, and I believe Councilmember Treen has that one.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Howe. Sammamish, Washington, proclamation, Welcoming Week, September 13th through the 22nd, 2024. Whereas our community's success depends on ensuring that all residents feel welcome and valued, and whereas becoming a welcoming community means fostering an environment where all individuals, regardless of their background, are embraced and have the opportunity to thrive. And whereas when the city of Sammamish describes itself as welcoming, it means that we are committed to inclusivity, understanding, and compassion, creating a space where people from all walks of life feel a sense of belonging, are encouraged to participate fully in community life. And whereas this year's Welcoming Week campaign theme is We're All In It, or We're All In, calls on individuals to come together in celebration of their strengths and differences, showcasing how they are all in on building a community that values all perspectives, backgrounds, experiences, and cultures. And whereas this year's Welcoming Week campaign theme, We're All In, whereas new residents play a critical role in our community by bringing fresh perspectives, starting businesses, and contributing to our vibrant diversity. And whereas during Welcoming Week, we celebrate the spirit of unity that brings neighbors together across the city of Sammamish, reinforcing our commitment to creating an inclusive environment where everyone is valued. And whereas it is important for all residents of the city of Sammamish to join in this nationwide movement by renewing our commitment to our core values on inclusion and welcoming. And whereas by working together, we can achieve greater prosperity and make the city of Sammamish a place where people from around the world feel valued and choose to put down roots. Now, therefore, on behalf of the City Council, we proclaim the week of September 13th through the 22nd as Welcoming Week in the city of Sammamish. And I encourage all residents to come together under the theme of We're All In to build a stronger, more inclusive environment.
Thank you, Kent. And Pamela, excuse me, Councilmember Stewart, you have childhood cancer, right? Okay, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Proclamation, Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Whereas childhood cancer is the leading cause of death by disease in children, and whereas 1 in 285 children in the United States will be diagnosed by their 20th birthday, and whereas 46 children per day, or 16,790 children per year, are diagnosed with cancer in the U.S., and the average age of diagnosis is 6 years old. And whereas 2/3 of childhood cancer patients will have chronic health conditions as a result of their treatment toxicity, with 1/4 being classified as severe to life-threatening. And whereas approximately 1/2 of childhood cancer families rate the associated financial toxicity due to out-of-pocket expenses as considerable to severe, and whereas in the last 30 years, only 6 new drugs have been approved by the FDA to specifically treat childhood cancer, and whereas hundreds of nonprofit organizations at the local and national level are helping children with cancer and their families cope through educational, emotional, and financial support, and whereas researchers and healthcare professionals work diligently, dedicating their expertise to treat and cure children with cancer, and whereas too many children are affected by this disease, and more must be done to raise awareness and find a cure. Now, therefore, Deputy Mayor Howe, on behalf of the Sammamish City Council, does hereby proclaim September 2024 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart.
September is recognized around the United States as National Suicide Prevention Month, and it is intended to help promote awareness of the prevalence of suicide and prevent suicides. And whereas suicidal thoughts can affect anyone regardless of age, gender, race, orientation, income level, religion, or background, and whereas suicide is the leading cause of death in the United States, with more than 50,000 people losing their lives to suicide in 2023, equating to 1 death every 11 minutes. And whereas the 2024 National Strategy for Suicide Prevention has been developed as a bold new 10-year comprehensive whole-of-society approach to suicide prevention that provides concrete recommendations for addressing gaps in the suicide prevention field. And whereas the national strategy emphasizes the importance of community-based suicide prevention, treatment, and crisis services, quality improvement, research, and health equity. And whereas this strategy is accompanied by the first ever federal action plan, which outlines over 200 actions across federal government to be taken over the next 3 years to support of the strategy goals. And whereas the key areas of focus in the strategy includes the intersection of suicide and substance use, youth and social media, lethal means safety, and ensuring health equity in suicide prevention efforts. And whereas the City of Sammamish is committed to supporting initiatives that promote mental health, provide crisis intervention services, and prevent suicide through collaboration, care, and community engagement. Now, therefore, Karen Howe, Deputy Mayor of Sammamish, do hereby proclaim September 2024 as Suicide Prevention Awareness Month.
Thank you, Councilmember Lamb. I'm going to take a small point of privilege and just mention when I was out on National Night Out, and maybe you had similar experiences with the police officers we were with, but the officer I was with commented the several times he has been involved in trying to prevent a suicide in Sammamish of young people in specific. And so it really brought it home how relevant and unfortunately just how common it is to have this be an experience just right here at home. So just wanted to bring that up, that it's a real thing. I'll move on now to our presentation, which is going to be from David Pyle and Audrey Starcy. We're going to be getting an update on Town Center and critical areas update and the comp plan. Thank you.
All right, good evening, Council. David Pyle, Department of Community Development. I'm being promoted right now. Two really heavy topics on the awareness campaign this evening. Thank you for talking about those. So I am here to share something a little lighter, which is our major projects update. We've been giving these to you every month as we've progressed through a really heavy workload this year. We have several projects that are currently underway, and as I find my presentation, just a second here. Go. All right. We have a few really large projects underway this year that essentially all culminate into our comprehensive plan at the end of the year. Here we have a list of dates of upcoming meetings through November. That's followed by additional meetings in December. Now keep in mind, some of these may change. You're seeing essentially an uptick in the work at the council level as we conclude a lot of the work with the Planning Commission. In an easier to understand timeline format, I'll walk through some of these projects with you and show how these make their way from the Planning Commission to the City Council, and ultimately we will merge these into one larger final action, which is adoption of our comprehensive plan at the end of the year. So as I said previously, all things lead to the comprehensive plan. The work plan may appear to include several separate projects that are all moving forward. However, they are generally all interconnected, and staff have been working to ensure alignment between the various efforts and work groups. This includes the following items and projects, which will merge together later this year. The first of these is the East Lake Development docket proposal. This was one item that was docketed last year. It was proposed by James Eastman related to creation of a neighborhood center. The Planning Commission has completed their review of the proposal and made a recommendation to the City Council. Later this evening, the council will be asked to hold a public hearing and consider the proposal and the Staff and Planning Commission recommendation. If approved, these text amendments will be added to the comprehensive plan with the next draft. To be clear, there is no project proposal here. Instead, this is all about adding some language to the comprehensive plan, which may result in a potential neighborhood center planning effort, and in many years down the line, a potential development that could take place. The next is the SB 5290 streamlining permit process. The Planning Commission has wrapped up their work on this and will be holding a public hearing this Thursday, September 5th. And this is all about the state mandate to improve the efficiency of permit processing in order to help, move permitting for residential homes and housing along faster. The legislature has identified that some cities have added things that are blockages to the delivery of housing product through permitting. There will be a City Council workshop to highlight the proposed changes on October 1st, followed by a public hearing on October 15th. The critical areas update is moving along pretty quickly now. The Planning Commission has held a public hearing on July 18th and made a recommendation to the City Council. We'll present the final draft critical areas ordinance at the City Council meeting on September 17th for final review. The agenda packet will include a matrix showing all the changes that have been made and why they have been made. City Council will hold a public hearing on November 5th, and after that, consider adoption. The big item here, the comprehensive plan. The Planning Commission has completed review of the draft of the 2024 comprehensive plan, and following holding a public hearing, made a recommendation to the City Council. The draft was presented to the City Council before the August break, and the Council was provided with a link to review and comment on the draft in the Convio app, which allows providing input and comment to the draft document. Staff will be going over what we have heard later this evening. The Planning Commission is continuing with review of the comprehensive plan implementing development regulations necessary to align the draft comp plan with new state legislation. And the Council will continue to review the draft 2024 comprehensive plan and begin review of implementing development regulations in October. The Town Center Plan and Code Amendment Project, after slowing down a little on this work, we're again ramping this up. The city's consultant framework has been working with its sub-consultant, Kidder Matthews, to explore different housing types and test the feasibility of various affordability levels in the town center based on different housing typologies. Framework has also identified proposed updates to the Town Center Plan and high-level code updates that will be discussed and further defined through the Planning Commission, the City Council, and community and stakeholder input. Updates on all this work will be shared with the City Council on October 1st and with the Planning Commission on October 17th. The Transportation Master Plan has been released, and the Planning Commission wrapped up their review of it. We have another slide following this that my counterpart Audrey Starcy will get into a little more detail on. But we'll go ahead and skip to the annual docket process. There was one proposed docket item this year, and it's a city-initiated item related to anticipated development regulations refinement. We have a lot going on this year, and although we can't predict exactly what we will need to address, we wanted to make sure we had a placeholder on our work plan, and we had taken the steps to formally docket code cleanup for 2025. The Planning Commission is scheduled to hold a public hearing on this docket item on October 17th, and it will be brought forward to the City Council for consideration later this fall. Basically, we want to retain the ability to be nimble in 2025, and if something comes of our code update work this year that we need to tweak or adjust, we want to be able to quickly spool that up and bring that to you. It is essential to have that docketed in order to allow that work to happen. With that, I'll turn it over to my counterpart, Audrey Starcy, who will go over the TMP and the status of that work.
Thank you so much, David, and good evening, Council. Audrey Starcy, Public Works Director. As David just was talking about the TMP, we're very excited about it. We just presented to the Planning Commission last Thursday. The second draft of many drafts is currently on our web page, and we would love any feedback from the community and from Council, of course. Any comments that we have received to date from the community as well as Planning Commission through the end of August are being currently incorporated into the third draft of the TMP. We are preparing later this week to release both a Q&A document on our TMP website as well as a matrix of all comments received. So should a comment not be incorporated into the TMP, we'll of course address that as well, and that'll be on our webpage. We are planning to present the TMP in a workshop style session on the October 8th City Council meeting, and we'll be back on November 19th to open the public hearing and ask that the public hearing be closed and seek Council adoption of the TMP on December 3rd. Back to you, David, and Council happy to answer any questions.
Council, do you guys have questions for Audrey or David? Okay, I've got Councilmember Gupta first, and then Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you for the update, David. Is there have we already hit the cutoff for community members to submit for the annual docket annual docket? Are we only going to see that one, or is there the possibility that we might see something else come up?
We had, the docket deadline closed in August, so that is the only one that was put on the list. And actually, speaking honestly, we're thankful for that. We've been taking on a lot of policy work recently, and I think that 2025, we might be different as some people read through the comp plan and identify where they might want to propose a text change or a development regulation change. So we actually are thankful that the community is pausing on that and wanting to read the new regulations and the new comp plan that comes out, and then make proposals based on that, as opposed to the current comp plan, which tends to complicate things.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, David and Audrey. The comp plan, as we are slogging through it, I don't mean to throw Scott under the bus, but he did say we had a little more time if we needed it for comments. So I wanted to make sure I understood what your deadlines were so that we're not too late in getting comments back to you. I mean, obviously, we're the council, we can do whatever, but we want to make your lives less painful, not more. If we haven't gotten all of our comments in yet, and I do apologize, but I was out of town for a while due to a family emergency, what timeline are you looking at for us to get comments to you?
So this evening, actually, I think the two items down the line after this, we have the docket item, and then we have the comp plan after that.
Right.
We will be rolling through the different elements and what we've heard so far. And responding directly to your question, the next time we will be meeting on that will be September 19th. Then again on October 3rd, then again on October 15th. And ideally, we are starting to wrap it up in November. December is when we are needing to take action. So I would say that between September 19th and October 3rd is really when we would benefit from receiving comments from you all, given that then we'll have some time to wrap those into the comp plan, make changes where needed, answer questions, and then really get that final draft out for final review, which at that point, there shouldn't be anything surprising left in there. I'd argue that there shouldn't be anything surprising in it today, because we've had, 44 meetings so far on all of the comp plan
But who's
topics
counting?
leading up to it. But yes, that's a good question. And we also will be, again, in two items down the agenda here, reiterating that we're here to meet with you. We would really love to meet with you, one-to-one, face-to-face, via Teams, however it works out, 2s and 3s if you wanted to. We're here for that. So as you go through it and you have comments, and if there are some that would be better suited for a conversation, we're happy to have that conversation.
So to drive the procrastinator in me, I heard you say September 19. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
And also for the community comment period, especially on the TMP, is that something that we're putting out on like the Facebook or website so that people know that comment period is open for the TMP? I may have just missed it, but I didn't think I saw anything on the.
I will double check, and we are planning to add the graphic that was on the third slide this evening to the webpage as well, so that
Awesome.
The community can understand when and how their comments may be incorporated into the different drafts.
Awesome. This is great. Thank you guys so much. I know this is like a heavy lift doesn't even begin to express the amount of work here. So thank you so much.
The good news is we've had a lot of feedback on all these so far. So we feel we're pretty well oriented as to where we're going with it. And thanks to you all for providing your feedback so far.
Any additional comments? If not, then we'll move ahead into the public hearing.
That would be the East Lake Development LLC public hearing, correct?
Text amendment.
Text amendment.
Yes.
We have a brief presentation,
I am looking forward to that.
which will be followed by the public hearing.
Perfect.
All right, you gonna share? I'll stop sharing.
Yep, just waiting to get promoted. Good evening, City Council.
All right, here we go. As David said, we are here tonight to talk about proposed text amendment to the 2024 comprehensive plan. And I will go ahead and just dive right into the presentation. It's a short one. So tonight, the City Council will hear a brief presentation explaining the proposed text amendments and the docket process. Staff will then answer any questions the Council have on the topic. Following that, the City Council will open a public hearing and deliberate on approving the proposed text amendments for inclusion in the 2024 comp plan. Before we jump into the proposal itself, I wanted to provide a reminder of the process for comprehensive plan amendments outside of the periodic update. Sammamish operates under the Growth Management Act, which directs cities to do a periodic update to the comp plan every 10 years. In between periodic updates, an annual review may occur that allows for two types of amendments: site-specific land use map amendments and text amendments to the comp plan or the development regulations. Tonight's application is a result of a text amendment proposal that was docketed during annual review in 2023. Excuse me. Docket requests can be submitted year-round, with the submitted request being pulled once a year. Requests get presented to the Planning Commission and City Council, with the City Council deciding which requests warrant further consideration by placing them on the docket. This docket item was considered last fall by the Planning Commission on November 2nd and docketed by the City Council on December 5th. Once the text amendment is docketed, the applicant has 30 days to submit a text amendment application that provides more detailed information about the proposal, completes a non-project SEPA checklist, and describes compliance with Title 24A's decision criteria. Once review has been completed by staff, the application proceeds to legislative review with the Planning Commission and City Council, with City Council making the decision on whether the application is approved or denied. Should these text amendments be approved by the City Council, they will be integrated into the adopted 2024 comprehensive plan at the end of the year. This text amendment proposal was submitted by Eastlake Development, LLC. Their application asked the city to create a new land use goal in the Sammamish Comprehensive Plan related to the creation of neighborhood centers throughout the city and indicate the Eastlake property in the northwest quadrant of the city as a potential neighborhood center on the Comprehensive Plan's future land use map. Eastlake Development, LLC submitted a revision to their application to include additional proposed policies or amendments to existing policies that further refine and support their amendment. To expedite the presentation, I have summarized the key themes from the proposed amendments. You can find the full list of amendments in Exhibit 2 on your agenda. The key themes are including policies that encourage the use of development agreements, incentives, and design flexibility to produce positive development outcomes, like the protection of open space or tree canopy, improve stormwater management, providing a variety of housing options, or road and trail connections. The proposed policies also encourage new neighborhood centers that create a range of retail, restaurant, cultural, and social amenities, ecotourism uses, and support private development that result in the protection of critical areas and natural areas. Title 24A requires applications be reviewed using the review criteria you see on screen. Staff have reviewed the applicant's supplied compliance narrative and the proposal to the decision criteria and have found it to be in compliance. On July 25th, the Planning Commission recommended the text amendment proposals by a vote of 7-0, as amended by staff, to be incorporated in the 2024 comprehensive plan. Staff provided minor wording edits to the text proposals and recommend they are approved and incorporated into the comp plan. The Planning Commission also recommended a definition of ecotourism be added to the comp plan along with the proposed text amendments. This slide just summarizes what this is and isn't. Ultimately, it's the addition of policies to the comp plan, and it is not a development proposal or an approval of any design or plan. All that would happen in the future. So tonight, it's just creating the policy space in the comp plan to allow something like this to happen in the future. And on screen here, you see the list of options before the council, with option 2 being the Planning Commission and staff recommendation, of approving the text amendments with staff edits, along with the commission's recommendation of a definition of ecotourism. I'll hand it back over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, and I'll ask the council if they have any questions at this time. If not, we can proceed to the hearing. No, Amy, do you have? Okay. Now, has this hearing already been opened once? Or are we doing it for the first time?
This is the first time.
Okay, I'm excited to do this. So there, we are now opening that hearing. And I have no idea what to do next. Do we have someone who's going to be speaking to this in the room that's already signed up? And it has to be specifically to this particular agenda item.
I believe there's a pre-registered list sign up that I think is being passed along now.
James Eastman, you are first.
James Eastman, East Lake Sammamish Parkway. I usually know what I'm going to get up here and speak about, but on this one, I put my name on the list, and here I am, and it's been a long time coming. I think it's been 16 years. I think I was 25 years old when I first acquired a piece of property here, maybe 26, 27, but it's been a while. And from there, I've been through a lot of the comprehensive plan and critical areas updates, and came ready to build about 7 years ago under the pilot program. And from there, a lot of the different needs of the city were in flux and in change, and I kept saying to myself, hey, if I just build this or buy this neighboring piece of property, I could provide the road connections the city wants. And the next year it was like, hey, if I get this, I can fix stormwater. And then it was, hey, if I get this, I can provide these trails, get the Emerald Necklace completed. So there's a lot going on over the last 7 years, but it's ended up that we have over 100 acres of land. This neighborhood center has come about with this comp plan update. So the original text amendment was to build a neighborhood center and concentrate density kind of as an anchor for the rest of the land, and still be able to do the roads if they're wanted, or the trails, or the connection to the lake. There's light rail 2 miles away. There's just so many wonderful things nearby or as part of the land that are awesome, and they're spectacular, and there's a lot of opportunities to fix some things using the public process. So as we've gone through this last year, I've worked with a consultant on, hey, we have this neighborhood concept that's gonna get developed that a year ago, I guess to today, we still don't know what a neighborhood center actually is. We gotta define that with you guys. But we have figured out like what would make this great, and that's what you see in the packet. Worked with a consultant over the last year, and I hope to work over the next few years to develop this concept and to make it a reality and provide benefits to the city, to the public, to my neighbors, to people that come to this beautiful area, because I really feel it emphasizes all the wonderful, great things about our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul Quinn. Okay. And George Toski.
My name is George Toski. We've owned property in Sammamish since Christmas Eve of 1996. No, it was not a gift from Santa Claus. The topic of the executive session concerns me if the property belonging to my neighbor is being offered at below
Excuse
market
me,
value.
I need to interrupt you for just a second because there's a point that I need to get straightened out. This is a public hearing specifically on the topic that we were just talking about.
Oh,
So
okay, so this isn't public comment time.
I think that this is what you have and the letter that you sent, which we all have and we've all read, yes, was during public comment. That was the right time, which was earlier.
I don't understand.
The
Am I supposed to stop now?
What would you like me to do?
As presiding officer, I think it does make sense to.
No.
You can. We do believe in the First Amendment, sir, but the time for public comment was at the start of the meeting, and we have received your comment in writing. So we do have your comments.
If you would like to give comment now, could we close our hearing and then you give your comment? Thank you. Are there any callers online for this hearing?
We have no pre-registered public hearing commenters. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, is there anything else that you would like to, actually, I need to take a motion at this point. Take it back. So. There is one more commenter? Oh. Sorry, I missed that. Mary Wichter, sorry, apologize. Why would you put your name at the bottom?
Mary Wichter, Sammamish, 24 years. I put my name at the bottom so anyone who wants to go before me can, and I always leave one after me so you don't have to, you can choose. Plus, a lot of times I'm the only one on the list. It's kind of fun that way. Anyway, I just wanted to speak. James Eastman has been coming to council meetings for 3, 4, maybe 5 years now. Sometimes he brings cookies. He always has a good story. He talks about how much he enjoys the city of Sammamish and the activities he does with his kids and family. I think he speaks towards the things that have value of the land and the whole city and also have value where he lives, which is very close to the entrance to Redmond, and there's other possible road connections. What I would say on behalf is I support everything in the packet, everything that was done at the Planning Commission. Every discussion that I've had or heard James Eastman speak, I think speaks really well to a future that should be part of Sammamish. What I would like to see is where some of his parcels are, there is stormwater that comes from above that is not sending good things into the lake. In fact, there's quite a bit of pollution and phosphorus that goes. James has actually tested it, and he's spoken to that before. That is not problems with his property, it's a problem with the property above. So the city always talks about being partners and working together and getting things done better. You've got problems going down to the lake, and I think whatever James does with his property, if the city worked with him, it would be a benefit for the environment, for the water quality, for the people, for what his property gets used at, and a benefit to James. So I don't know if that can be done under a development agreement or other things, but I think you don't have very many people acquiring 100 acres that are contiguous in the city. I think he's a very unique individual. I think he's really open to ideas. If you've never spoken with him, you should. And I just say I'm wholeheartedly support what he does, and I hope this city will be on your best dance moves to try to dance along with whatever's happening. So just wanted to say that. Thank you very much. And please always ask if there's comment in the room. And I think the confusion was there were a lot of sheets and people didn't know which one to sign up on today.
And we have one more commenter in the room.
Hello, City Council. Paul Stickney, Sammamish. I'm commenting on several things on the James Eastman project. I've spoke to it at the Planning Commission most recently under his public hearing there. Have talked in general about it with the environmental regulations, and Mary Wichter and I were involved in 2 iterations of going for 24A, which is the comprehensive plan docket stuff. And Mary can correct my dates, but I think we did it once in 2017 when Jeff Thomas was here, and then again in 2019. So some of the comments David Pyle mentioned about having a city comp plan docket item is important, and James being on the docket is important. And I'm not making this self-serving, I'm making this as community serving. Two things, environmental and housing types. On the environmental side, I've said several times that any stream on the Eastman property that didn't exist before development upstream and draining their stormwater through what he has should be open, in my opinion, I'm not a scientist, to collecting the water, treating the water, not having it be erosion because it wasn't a natural stream. If it was a natural stream, that's something else. A couple other things that have been said which apply to the Eastman issue as well as others, and that is the city had a highly prescriptive no disturbance zone over much of the city. In some cases, totally valid. In other cases, not. So what's happening here now and in the comp plan changes are to allow specific evaluation of a site-specific no disturbance application. Instead of saying no, you go to KNO, W, I'll spit out the W, and learn. And here's the last thing. To my earlier comment, I'm not going to speak to it exactly, but I will say that the housing imbalance is getting progressively more out of balance. And places like the Eastman location and Town Center and other sub-areas that are already developed are wonderful options to get housing prices that we need that are both market rate and affordable without putting too much emphasis in the neighborhoods. And one recent stat, so far the first 8 months in Sammamish, from zero to a $1 million price, we're 31% out of balance on the low side to the high side. It's staggering. I'll explain more later.
Thank you. And there's no other commenters in the room, is that correct? And none online, is that correct? Then we'll close the public comment period. Council, do you have questions? And I believe you do, right? Okay, Councilmember Land.
This isn't really a question, more of a comment. Can you bring up the slide that showed the different motions? So I believe it's option number 2, which is the staff recommended and planning commission recommendation. I definitely support it. I know we're not talking about Mr. Eastman's proposal, but I do support ecotourism once we get it defined. And I think that it's an opportunity to make Sammamish more unique compared to our neighbors, and hopefully that will bring in like more tourism dollars. So I very much support this.
Are you prepared to make the motion? Or is there any other questions? I don't have anyone else signing up. Oh, now we do. Okay. So I will start with Councilmember Gupta, and then we will go to Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to highlight that, and as mentioned in our packet and the application, that property is currently zoned R4. So if council chose not to adopt this, East Lake Development LLC could still choose to develop that property under current zoning. So I just want, what was helpful for me was not making it a choice between nothing happens on that property and we go forward with this amendment. This is what would we like to see for the future of Sammamish, which I think is apropos for this meeting. So yeah, just wanted to point that out. Thank you.
Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, can you give me staff, David, or who are you again? Sorry. Evan. Thanks, Evan. I was going to say another name, and I was like, that's not his name. On the neighborhood centers, currently do we have neighborhood centers?
So we currently do not have neighborhood centers in the city's comprehensive plan. what we're doing is we're moving to identifying, and if you look at we'll get to this in the next item on the agenda this evening, but one of the big changes with the city's comprehensive plan is that in the past, we have had zoning that is flat or static to the future land use designation of properties, and there has been limited capacity for where to drive or move future growth in the city to, aside from the town center, which is our one sub area that we do have. So what we're looking to do is to, over time, and of course with budget and work plan to do so, begin the planning process for additional sub areas identified as the Inglewood, the Pine Lake, and the Kalahani potential future sub areas, as well as a few areas that are currently identified as potential neighborhood centers. And neighborhood centers, as we understand it, and we've had this debate internally, we've talked about it with you, talked about it with the Planning Commission, heard from the community about this, is neighborhood centers are, as we see it, of a lower intensity than a sub area. They're a type of sub area, and they go through the same planning process that a sub area would go through, but a neighborhood center is a lower intensity typically than a sub area. It might include a block or 2 blocks of residential retail core, and then it could include, in this case, some ecotourism area, and could include some other residential areas, and maybe there are some street connections that are made. And as Mr. Eastman points out, one thing that he's talked a bit about, and I've seen this happen before, and I believe that it can be done in the right way, is improvement to water quality and some of the damage that's being done by down cutting because of water moving down those ravines, or whatever Mary would qualify them as, because I don't know if they are called ravines, based on her definition earlier this evening. So I just wanted to point out that these changes are part and parcel to, or part of a bigger vision that Mr. Eastman has in his docket item to create a future neighborhood center in that area. But in order for us to facilitate the ecotourism side of it, we do need policy language that helps drive that, allowing that type of use, which is a lower intensity use than what I would think of as traditional residential.
But yeah, I guess that part I understand. So I kind of feel like we're in a detail and down in versus first solving the challenge of, here is our land use map and our future land use map that says, here's what we want to do. So by voting for this, I'm struggling, by voting for this, in favor of it, in a sense, then I've committed myself then to also voting in favor of a future land map that we really haven't debated and looked at extensively and had public discussion about it, that would then put neighborhood centers throughout the city. Am I missing that? Or
I would disagree. I think that they are related, but they're not dependent on each other. There are other areas in the city, and the city does have a legacy of serving as an ecotourism destination, although they didn't know that was what it was called back then. But once upon a time, there was a series of destinations where people would go: Beaver Lake, Pine Lake, and the Sammamish Heritage Society actually has some information on their website about this, that the city does have a history of serving as an ecotourist destination for the greater Seattle area. And one of the things we've talked about, we've heard it from others, is that they'd like to find a way for us to try to bring that back as part of our identity as a community. And this is one of the first steps of trying to get there. So it's opening the door to that as part of our identity. That can happen separately from creation of a sub or a neighborhood center. Mr. Eastman could develop an ecotourism component of his property without actually doing a neighborhood center. So that doesn't have to happen together.
so which option allows me to do that? Or what amendment would I have to put to one of these other options so that what you just said, that they don't have to be connected together, is possible.
So I would suggest that option one or option two would achieve that, because these specific bundle of amendments that are in the packet do not have anything to do with, or at least I want to make sure I'm correct, do not, from my understanding, have anything to do with the actual neighborhood center component of it. Instead, what it does is it is additive on top of that, and it also addresses another type of use that Mr. Eastman would like to propose or pursue on his property. And it might be that he pursues a neighborhood center with a ecotourism component, or it might be that he first pursues an ecotourism component because it is likely easier to achieve in the shorter term, and then pursues a neighborhood center. Or it's possible that he pursues only ecotourism, or it's possible that he pursues neighborhood center, and then down the line, when he gets to it, he does ecotourism. But what I'm saying is that the two are not dependent on each other, but they could be very well intertwined if we were to do proper planning.
Yeah, so in Exhibit 2, it pretty much, unless it's, because that's part of this, is that it just encourages the development of new neighborhood centers, which are designed to provide a variety of housing options and et cetera. Okay, so he can do that, or is Exhibit 2 not a part of it, and this is just informational?
So I think to help clarify, the original docket proposal did advocate for including the Eastman Neighborhood Center, proposed Eastman Neighborhood Center on the future land use map. And then once that application was submitted, they submitted a revision that added that list of 14 policies that talk about ecotourism and the ones I listed. I think by voting for option 2, or what these text amendments do, I don't think binds you to committing to adopting the future land use map, because you still will be going through the entire review process of the comp plan and the future land use map. Right now, the Eastman potential neighborhood center is indicated on the future land use map as a potential neighborhood center, but that's still fully at the discretion of the city council. And part of the conversation you could have at the next agenda item tonight, or on October 15th, November 5th, prior to adopting the comp plan in December. So I don't think it commits you to approving a future land use map right now. It just is something that you will discuss as a possibility for adoption with the comp plan.
I think another
You're
way.
splitting hairs there. I get what you're doing.
Well,
I get it, but
another way to think of this is that we already had the neighborhood center component added to the draft 2024 comprehensive plan, and that's already made its way through review. What this is an additional refinement to some of the text of the draft comprehensive plan. By voting this evening on this, and if this were to pass, this would be giving staff direction to roll these amendments into the draft comprehensive plan. That doesn't mean you've adopted the comp plan. That simply means that you're directing the staff to add these amendments to the proposed comp plan. And we would then bring back the draft version 4 with these amendments in it, and you would then consider those along with the balance of the 2024 comp plan when you do take action on it. And if you were to make a motion and you had enough friends supporting that motion to remove neighborhood centers from the future land use map, and that was a motion you were to make later, then that all would be removed at that point. But my point is that this in itself does not formally adopt anything. All that it does is gives the staff direction to add these very specific amendments to the draft that we're working on for further consideration down the line. That's all that it does.
thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. That's really helpful. And I just want to I just want to thank Mr. Eastman for taking Councilmember Gupta and I on a tour of the property. It was very interesting to actually get to see the property and the contours, and to reiterate what Councilmember Gupta said. If we do nothing, then we will likely end up with a bunch of additional large single-family homes that are now known to be sort of the worst thing we can do from an environmental perspective, from a traffic perspective. So by giving us this option of having neighborhood centers, we can actually create spaces that will be more accommodating, more inclusive, right, and more welcoming, as well as more sustainable and environmentally friendly. And with the ecotourism component, we can protect some additional parts of that land for different creative uses that aren't going to just be used for homes, which I think is also really quite amazing. And if you look at some of the ideas that he's put forward and the property that it would go on, it really could be something to behold for the city. So I really appreciate all of the work that staff has done, and Mr. Eastman and company to get us to this point. I think it could have a lot of potential. So I'm excited to see this move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any additional comments from the council? Okay, I'll add mine then. Just quickly, the way that I perceive this is it's giving us language for flexibility. That's all it is. We could choose to use it or not. But I like the idea of having lots of words that let us do what we want. So that's how I see it. If that's the case and we're good, then I would consider a motion.
I motion to approve the application of Eastman Development LLC text amendments as amended and recommended by staff in Exhibit 3 to be incorporated into the 2024 comp plan upon adoption, along with the definition of ecotourism.
Would you like to speak to your motion? Sorry. It was seconded?
Second.
Thank you. Yeah. Would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I would like to thank Mr. Eastman for all the time, and again, staff for all their time on this. Thank you.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. I'm going to close the hearing now. With authority. There we go.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The next topic on the agenda this evening is the review of the 2024 Comprehensive Plan. And good news, we're ahead of schedule, so it's 8:05 p.m., and I believe we will be having our consultant framework join us, Jeff Arango and Tyler Quinn Smith. I believe they're being promoted or are about to be promoted, so bear with us while we make the transition.
Thank you.
David, I don't see Tyler on the list.
It may be Jeff this evening, which we'll take. So we approve.
Hi, good evening. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I'm just going to get my screen share set up here.
We can hear you and see you.
Great.
Thank you.
And it will just be me this evening. Okay, great. We're ready to go. Good evening, Deputy Mayor Howe and City Council members. Jeff Arango with Framework, and I'm going to give an overview of the Comprehensive Plan periodic update process and summarize some of the feedback we've received from the council members. Want to start by just thanking you for taking the time and reviewing the document. Your feedback's really critical to getting through the final stage through the adoption process, so thank you for that. Sorry about that. So our agenda this evening, we're going to go through some of the updates that we've made since the July 16th meeting, where we provided an initial overview of the comprehensive plan update. We'll go through some of the agency and partner feedback that we've incorporated, as well as the process update. We'll provide a brief overview of each of the elements, some of the feedback we received through Convio, potential for motions to amend as needed, and then wrap up and discuss next steps. So we've been collecting a lot of feedback from various groups, including internal to the city as well as external groups. This chart highlights some of the external partners that we've had dialogues with and received feedback from, and where that feedback has been directly incorporated into specific elements. So you can see kind of where that feedback is being incorporated. For example, one of the comments we've heard through the Convio is regarding some of the policy language or emphasis on wildlife corridors. And some of that feedback, for example, comes from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. So we're continuing to coordinate with these agencies as we move through the adoption and certification process, and we'll continue to incorporate feedback as it's received. So a little bit of an update on the process. So starting with the July 16th meeting, we had a meeting with the Planning Commission on July 25th, which was the public hearing and recommendation, followed by a code workshop on updates to the Sammamish Development Code. Later in July, we initiated our review with the Puget Sound Regional Council, which is required for plan certification. We had our meeting with the Affordable Housing Committee at King County for intake of the housing element for review, and have received initial feedback from them. Later in August, we had a code workshop with the Planning Commission that was highly successful. We received a lot of good feedback and confirmation of the direction that we're kind of headed on the code. And then the 60-day review has been initiated, and September 5th is the AHC board meeting. And Department of Commerce 60-day review is also being initiated in September. So these will continue to move kind of simultaneously along with the review by the City Council. So this slide highlights the vision, which was a result of the extensive community process early on in the comprehensive plan update process. We have received a few comments about the vision, and there is certainly an opportunity to make some tweaks, but that was something that was established early on in the process. In the middle are all of the various elements, including two new elements for the city, including economic development and climate change and resiliency. And then on the right-hand side of the slide is the review process. You can see highlighted in red is the meeting today. David earlier in the meeting provided a very detailed schedule of the meetings coming forward, and we are on track to adopt the comprehensive plan and the code updates by the end of the year. There are some recent legislation where the city does have until the middle of next year or later to complete some of the code updates, but we've been able to incorporate that into the process so that the city can hit the ground running in 2025 with all of the other various plan and efforts and refinements to the city's planning program. Okay, so the policy framework really establishes all the various requirements that we have to incorporate into the comprehensive plan update. It really starts with the State of Washington and the Growth Management Act, of which there's been several key updates in the past couple of years. The state develops a growth allocation methodology for the entire state, which then filters down to the Puget Sound Regional Council and then on to King County. And then there's a collaborative process between King County and the various jurisdictions to set the growth targets, and eventually something that's new this year, which is the affordable housing allocation. Sammamish is given the growth target in the affordable housing allocation and then has to plan adequately for that, primarily in the land use plan, but also supported in other elements as well. As part of Vision 2050, which is the PSRC regional plan update, Sammamish is in the cities and towns category. And you can see some of the features highlighted there on the slide that define the cities and towns category. And that's really what resulted in the 2044 growth target of 2,100 homes and 768 jobs. And the comprehensive planning life cycle diagram here is really to highlight that the process for the developing the plan over a couple of years is relatively short over the 20-year planning horizon, and it is expected that there will be plan monitoring, some refinement, and continued efforts on implementation. The comprehensive plan is really meant to be a guiding policy document with the details for implementation left to a city work program and refined during the budget process. Public engagement has been robust throughout the comprehensive plan update process, collecting feedback in a variety of ways from large, more kind of community type events. We had a series of planning summit topics early on in the process. We had a fantastic policy workshop about a year ago that's been incorporated. And we've been really taking all of that input and incorporating it into the comprehensive plan update. And you can see there on the lower right-hand corner some of the themes that we've heard about, wanting a diverse and inclusive, safe and welcoming community, lots of comments about wanting more housing variety, choice, and affordability, continuing the very strong themes in Sammamish's planning program of connections and protections of the natural environment, reducing impacts to climate change, resilient infrastructure and social networks, more options for transportation, and strong community identity, services, and cultural events, and retail amenities, some of which can be expressed with some of the goals and policies in the new economic development, as well as some of the land use strategies around town center and the other mixed use centers. And as was mentioned earlier, we're up to approximately 45 meetings and counting, and have several planned for the upcoming fall and early winter. So some of the feedback that we received from council in what we're calling the front matter, which is kind of the introduction and vision part of the plan. So one comment was to have more of an emphasis on climate change prevention and might be missing from the planning values in the 2044 vision. Again, something that we can take a look at and incorporate updates to. The next one, which I think is a great comment, adding in HB 1110, which is the middle housing bill, and some of the other key pieces of legislation that are driving some of the code updates that we're working on. Another great comment, adding image captions needed throughout Volume 1 and Volume 2, so we can highlight sort of the purpose and intent of each of the images that we've chosen for the document. So we can certainly incorporate that. And then some minor graphic improvements for clarity, which we'll be going through and incorporating into the next draft as well. So the land use element is really the foundation of the comprehensive plan, and the one that really drives the components of all of the other elements, which are designed to be in support of the land use plan. And given our charge for this update, incorporating the updated growth target, the new affordable housing allocation, which I'll talk about more in a moment, and all of the other state legislation, many of these updates have been fairly prescriptive, but really the challenge has been to figure out how to do it in a way that best supports the goals of Sammamish, and not necessarily, how another community might approach it, or even exactly how the guidance has been provided from some of the agencies. So we spent a lot of time sort of calibrating and figuring out, what's going to be the best solution for Sammamish. And I think we've come up with some fairly unique strategies, particularly in the code, as ways to do that. So some of the numbers that we have to plan for, the growth target, the 2,100 units, we need to demonstrate we have capacity in our land use plan to be able to do that, and we do. The housing need or the housing allocation then takes those numbers of units and divides it up into certain income categories. So we need to show we have capacity in certain types of housing. The map in the lower left-hand corner kind of shows you how we allocated that within the different zoning districts. And we've been able to demonstrate that to the satisfaction of the agencies that we've been meeting with and those that will be reviewing the plan. Some of the land use categories have been updated. As David mentioned earlier, we're trying to make the future land use map more of a flexible planning tool as it's intended to be. Not necessarily a carbon copy of the zoning map, although some of the boundaries and districts are, of course, very similar. One of the new designations is called neighborhood residential, and that encompasses all of the areas within the traditional R zones, so R1 through R8. And that has a series of the existing zoning districts that can apply within that. The urban residential is another step up, looking at sort of density between kind of middle housing and sort of larger mid-rise developments. And that shift's really driven in part by the changes that are required for middle housing and making sure that there's an appropriate range of districts that provide a variety of types of housing. Town center, I think most are familiar with, but that's where you see everything from kind of middle housing up to mid-rise buildings, which are shown here. The mixed-use centers, which do allow for mixed-use development, even though currently they're primarily commercial, retail-based properties with some other kind of varied land use. There is plans in the city's program to do sub-area plans for those areas and also look at some of the major connections between them. So that's an exciting opportunity to allow the community to take a fresh look at opportunities to meet community goals within those areas. Neighborhood centers, which is really more of a concept, a policy concept at this point, something that will be fleshed out as part of a planning effort next year, but really sets a good foundation within the comprehensive plan for these things to happen over time. And then parks and open space, I think it's fairly obvious. It's the city-owned parks and other open space and natural areas within the city. So some of the city council feedback, feeling like the wildlife corridor language might be overemphasized. So that's definitely something we'll take a look at. It is something we got from some agency comments and definitely did hear some comments from the community about that in engagement. So we'll try to balance that in refining the language. And another suggestion to include language like where possible or where feasible within the wildlife corridors. And I think this really gets to kind of balancing the need to plan for urban development, housing, jobs within the city, and also balancing the goals for protection of the natural environment. And then another great suggestion, missing policies regarding dark skies. For those not familiar with the term, it refers to sort of light pollution or, making it difficult to see the sky in the evening and nighttime. And then there was a planning commission recommendation, which we have not incorporated directly into the current draft, but one that we plan to, but are looking for direction or confirmation from the city council. And that's to add a policy that talks about promoting adequate separation between newer higher density development and existing lower density development. So in situations where you have a higher intensity zoning district next to a lower density or lower intensity district requiring some buffering, which could be the distance of development to the property line, but also things like landscaping to kind of soften the transition. Certainly something, we're agreeable to add if the council also concurs. So the housing element, the emphasis really on this is related to the housing allocation. So the breakdown of units by affordability. And you can see that there in the center of the slide. We've had to basically look at land use to make sure we had adequate provisions for multifamily units, particularly those that are more likely to address the deeper affordability. I think we've been able to demonstrate that. There's also opportunities to look at potential expansions of housing capacity through the future sub-area planning process as well. But we feel really good, I think, about where we ended up, and we're working on the code development piece of that right now, and look forward to sharing that with the City Council in one of our upcoming meetings. So some of the feedback, add policy for a citywide inclusionary requirement, and that is something that we are looking to incorporate into the comp plan as well as into the code. We've been having some coordinating meetings with Arch and have another one scheduled for this week. So we plan to have more information on that here shortly. Minor policy clarifications and copy edits. We'll pick those up, remove duplicative policies, H 3.5 and 5.2, and then clarity on data analysis in volume 2 I have been going through those comments, and I think we can clarify that. And I believe there was also a request to see if we could break down one of the charts using a different metric. So we'll take a look, and if we're able to do that, we'll include that in the next draft. So transportation, the TMP, which is going to be volume 2, as you know, is also moving through the process, and that's planned to be updated next year. Also planned to do, I believe, a bike and pedestrian master plan, which could be an exciting development for the city going forward. The transportation plan, of course, has to demonstrate adequate provisions and concurrency for the land use plan. We're also going to be doing further transportation planning as part of the town center update and part of the EIS, supplemental EIS work for that. So this element has been updated, and we'll continue to see refinements going forward. And some of the feedback: add clarity around existing bike lanes and sidewalks, and some minor policy clarifications and text edits. Parks and Recreation Plan or element is really focused on incorporating the PROS plan update, the Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan, which was updated recently. Parks continue to be just a fantastic asset within the city and really draw people into the city. And so we're looking to build upon that and continue to maintain and build out a world-class park system. The parks projects, the 6-year project list is being incorporated into the capital facilities plan as well. And look forward to seeing more great park projects in Sammamish in the future. And the only comment we received was some graphic clarity on the Parks and Recreation or Parks and Open Space map, which we'll take a look at and update. Economic development element is a new element for the city, and I think establishes a good policy foundation, but more work is needed, I think, to really define what economic development and particularly the city's program will look like. Some of the themes that we looked at in the middle is a map of land value per acre, which is a metric of economic productivity. Sammamish is much lower compared to its peers, which is an indication of lower city revenues per acre, but also potentially highlighting challenges in funding services. The other trend we looked at is just the number of folks that travel outside of the city to work, and some 6,000 people travel into the city to work. So having a better match between local jobs and housing opportunities and creating more opportunities for people to work and live in Sammamish are some of the themes we built upon in this element. And then also kind of the importance of the centers and that future sub-area planning as a way to provide some of the amenities that the community is really looking for. Capital facilities and utilities is where we bring together all of the various capital facilities across all of the elements. We've reviewed and updated some of the level of service standards, which is what capital facilities planning is based on, as well as potential future updates to impact fees. We've had to do coordination with some of the outside service providers that are non-municipal. And we've updated the 6-year capital list and are working on refining the financial plan for that. But largely this element's in good shape and can support the amount of growth envisioned in the land use plan. One of the comments was to add policies to goal U5, which is encourage movement towards low carbon energy sources, incorporating new and advancing technologies to reduce overall demand and enhance service to the community. And certainly something we can incorporate. Another new element, very exciting, is the climate change and resiliency. This is a required element, but is actually not required for Sammamish until 2029. So we're ahead of the curve on that one. And the element is largely an incorporation of the Climate Action Plan, which was approved at the end of last year. And the city, through this element, has established some clear goals, including a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and a 96% reduction by 2050. Vehicle miles traveled goals include a 30% reduction by 2030 and a 50% reduction by 2050. And in order to meet these goals, we will have to look at, different strategies than what Sammamish may have used in the past. But it's exciting to have a well-crafted plan for how to get there. And I know the city will be continuing to work on this over the coming years in terms of implementation. And that's the last kind of slide on the elements. Our next steps, tonight's council direction and CON-DO feedback, we will have a discussion about. AHC feedback on the housing element and addressing that. PSR feedback on the vision consistency tool, which is a checklist that we prepared and submitting to PSRC. And then a reminder for our upcoming council meetings, October 15th, we'll review the updated plan and code. November, we'll also be reviewing the updated plan and code. Our public hearing is slated for December 3rd, and December 17th is our planned adoption date. And with that, I will turn it back over to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I was wondering if you had one slide that actually encapsulates all the areas where you need direct feedback or decision. Otherwise, you're going to be flipping through, which is fine, because this is good for us, right? So, council, look at you. You're lighting up the board. All right. Okay. So, Roshino Farrell, council member, please.
I get my full title tonight. That's wonderful. I just had a question about there we go, right there, the Planning Commission's recommendation about developing better transitions from one housing type to another, from like maybe an R1 or a single family setup to a slightly more dense setup. So how do we what are our next steps in kind of developing that recommendation into something more meaningful in the comp plan?
So Jeff, I can jump into this real quick and correct me where I'm wrong. So there's a couple of things going on here with this. The first is that we're faced with legislation that directs us to accommodate middle housing types, which are denser than single family. We cannot impose on middle housing types regulations or restrictions that are more restrictive than you would apply to single family. So we cannot apply adequate separation, if you will, to middle housing that we don't also apply to single family.
Yeah.
So that comes in the form of townhomes, duplexes, stack flats, all the middle housing types that we adopted, and also at the densities that the state directed that we need to allow it. So when we do we see this more as an issue with the neighborhood residential to the urban residential to the town center or future sub area. And when we're transitioning between those, we think it would be appropriate. So we will be working on a policy that really drives at those types of separations. The challenge there is that some members of the community, and I completely understand where they're coming from, are wanting to protect and ensure that there isn't going to be some form of a higher intensity development across the fence in their backyard. The challenge is that the state is telling us we have to allow that density across the fence from their backyard, and we can't apply regulations that are more restrictive than what would be applied to their property. So that, I think, is the big challenge. The issue we're trying to address is those bigger transitions that the state allows us to address.
Okay, all right, thank you.
It will be Councilmember Stewart and then Councilmember Treen and then Councilmember Lamb.
Great. Kind of just a directional question, I think, for me as I'm behind in providing my feedback. But looking at land use and the future land use map, one of the things that struck me was and I recognize that we have a transportation section, so that's why sort of my question. One of the things that struck me was that on that map, there's a little line for trails. But there's not really a place where we show on the future land use map or where we address directly in the land use section connectivity. We have a goal, right, where we say we want things to be more walkable and things like that, but we don't really address that connectivity piece directly. And when I see the little line for trails, trails means a lot. There's a vast difference between a hiking trail and a trail that, you know, someone can walk with their stroller on. It doesn't have to be paved, but it does have to be a little bit different. Like I'm imagining we have really great trails around Beaver Lake, but those are not trails that you can take your stroller on, right? And so while they may connect for some people, they don't connect for others. So my question to you is, should we have more information in the land use section around some of that connectivity, and not just in the transportation section? Because it feels like you're not going to get that connectivity if it's not built in and baked into the land use section.
So again, I'll take a crack at this and see if Jeff wants to fill in any gaps. So I would say that when we are designing development regulations, that we are designing them to the comprehensive plan, not just the land use element or the housing element or the transportation element. And that trails are really a transportation component. It's that connectivity as part of transportation. And I would say that land use is informed by transportation and transportation is informed by land use. So they all work hand in hand. One of the challenges with a comprehensive plan, when I first looked at one, I think in 2003 and read my first comp plan, I immediately noticed the inherent tension that is built into a comp plan. We're wanting to achieve all sorts of things, and sometimes they're a bit in conflict with each other. And really, you need to read it on a whole and try to understand based on the vision, the community vision that's established, and then the policies that ultimately add more refinement to what we're trying to achieve as to the direction you want to go. So I do understand what you're saying with regard to connectivity and there being different levels of connectivity. And, you know, I would tend to want to pull out any detail in that case because we don't have plans that show where all of those connections are. We would like to develop plans to show those connections, but we don't have those today. So if including some of the connections in the map, in the graphic, causes that reaction, then I would advocate for removing those connections from the map.
Okay, no, that's fair. And I guess where I think about it, and I think Mary just left, but she really got me to thinking about when I think about land use and I think about like a lot of our development regulations and other land use things, is that the best way to make sure we have some of that connectivity is to make sure that it's somehow built in. You know, just those little paths or connecting, you know, being able to connect one cul-de-sac to another through some sort of a required easement of sorts can make a huge difference. I know based on where I live, there's a little path in between two properties, which allows us to be able to ride our bike and connect in a way that, you know, it's barely wide enough to ride our bike on, but it makes a huge difference. And so I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost somewhere else and that it is kind of front and center. So I don't think we should remove the trails on there, maybe just make them easier to see. And I was struck because the section of the comp plan that talks about all of the feedback, the common theme, and I think there's even a statement that says the overwhelming ultimate goal that people had was a walkable city. And then one other question on that, we refer to a term that says walkable centers. Does a walkable center mean that it's easy to walk around within the center, or does it also mean that I can walk to said center?
I'll defer that one to Jeff.
Punt.
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is I think we could define it how we would like to. I think walkable center is probably more focused on the internal walkability within the center, right? Like you could walk there or you could park in one location and walk around it. But it's the primary means of accessing businesses and other services. So I think there's some leeway, but that's generally what I think of with the term. And then just to add a little bit on your first question, what you described is very common in sub-area planning and even in codes. And it's something that we'll be looking at in the town center update. So the ability to take a land use plan and a transportation plan and do it on one map. It's commonly referred to as a regulating plan. And we've done a few at Framework. But as David kind of indicated, when you're working at the scale of the city, it's really difficult to do that. However, I do think you could provide more detail on connectivity and future connectivity, but you would likely do that in the transportation element or potentially in the upcoming bike and pedestrian master plan. And maybe through that process, you could have some high level land use information to inform that. So that would, I think, ideally be the place to address those connectivity issues.
Excellent, thank you. Well, if we get to define walkable centers however we like, I'd like to make it have a definition of both, at least for some of them, particularly the neighborhood centers. I think in my head, right, a neighborhood center is by default saying that we want people within that neighborhood to be able to walk to that local coffee shop, right? Because that's kind of the whole point, is that you can go to the little general store, the little coffee shop, without having to get into your car or anything like that. So I would like for us to maybe clarify some of that if we could, because I think that's really critical.
I completely agree, and I, Sammamish has always been a walkable community in the sense that, you walk in your neighborhood, you use the trails, but I think it would be important to define it as, what you just described, which is
I think our walkability score is like a -4 or something. It's
got a machete.
It has the potential to be incredibly walkable, and the trails that we do have are lovely. They just don't really connect us to anything, and I think that's why my emphasis on the connectivity is that we do have some amazing and lovely trails, but you have to get in your car and drive to them so that you can go and enjoy them. And I would love for us to not have to require that, and that when people do attempt to walk, that it is not a death-defying feat for them to do so. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Treen.
David Pyle, did you read the prior comp plan? You've read it, right?
Yes. However, I wouldn't be able to recite any.
No, that's all right. Okay, so it had a table of contents, or a table of content. Can you flip to the table of content on this one? On the Vision 2040. I think there's 6 elements? I don't know. Here, you want me to tell you what page it is? I'm already past it though, but here, I'll just let you guys know. So the reality is when you look at the, like what I look at a book and I'm gonna go, oh, what chapter am I gonna read? Okay. So within there, we had 7 sections for a comprehensive plan. And all those, as you said, and I appreciate your comment about how the first time you ever read a comp plan, same here, the first time I read it, I saw the competing sections of a comp plan. All right. When we started this process, the idea was that we were going to do a comprehensive update, and in a sense, it was kind of a minor update, not a major changes, but and then some state laws came into effect, made it a little bit more complex than we wanted it to be or would have liked it to be, but we're paying for that in multiple ways. Okay, so I like that fact of the matter is that we had to do all this stuff about housing, but almost the whole plan is on housing or 2 elements that have been added to it that weren't even necessary. And then on top of that, you have a transportation section that's a little bit light, if you ask me, as far as like, what are we actually gonna, what are we trying to do here? Because I think that's an important piece of it, especially if we're gonna have all this new housing. So how are we gonna address the cars that are gonna go on the road? Whether you like the idea of walkability or not, the bottom line is people in Sammamish get in their cars and they go somewhere. It's just the way it is. It's a plateau. The one thing that's, in some ways, almost sickening to me is that when I look at these land use, yeah, perfect, that's where we need to start, excellent. Housing, okay. Transportation, I'm fine with it. Parks and recs, I mean, I have a challenge with the transportation piece. Parks and recs, we know we have one of the best, we have some of the best parks, but if we're not going to acquire more land to build more parks, don't bring in more people, because we have a level of service that is expected of us as a city, and so that's a competing element. Economic development didn't even have to do it. Climate change really didn't have to do that one either, but we had paid some money and got some grants, and so we put that in place. Good job, all right? Capital facilities, I'm missing one. You have a whole section completely missing from this comprehensive plan update.
So there was a chapter that was not required with the last comprehensive plan, wasn't required under RCW 3670A. That was because we have the sustainability chapter, I remember what the name of that chapter is specifically, the element, environment and conservation, that took the place of the prior environmental chapter, and that environmental chapter was primarily land use based. So those policies were rolled and moved into the land use chapter and diffused into the other sections too where appropriate. So majority of those policies live in the land use section, and there are some others in other parts of the comp plan. But the challenge that we ran into when trying to understand the table of contents as you present is that having two environmental chapters was confusing when so you're also correct. I'm not going to argue at all about the fact that there are themes with every update. The state, with this round of updates, is telling us to emphasize housing. We are literally being told to emphasize housing. So we're emphasizing housing. You're not wrong. However, the last round of updates that was done in 2015, one of the major themes was environmental conservation. Water quality was a big deal, still is a big deal, but I would say that with this round of legislation, what we are directly responding to and what you're seeing is related to housing. It is brought to the forefront of the plan for a reason.
Yeah, I guess my problem is, and this is where the you're seeking direction is, then we need to beef up to, it's out of balance. So currently in the state that it is right now, the Envision Sammamish 2044 Comprehensive Plan Periodic Update is out of balance. And so there needs to be some work done before I would be willing to vote to say, yeah, this is what I want to present to King County for approval. Which to be honest with you, I think they would approve it right now, the way it is, because you have done what they've asked for. So I think right now we're really close. So I appreciate that part of it. But when I look at it as when I look at the surveys and I talk to the residents of Sammamish and I look and see what's going on and I do the acknowledgement every council meeting about what the tribes want, and after talking with some of the members of the tribe, even at the celebration, it's like, wait a second, if I'm really going to live up to some of the things that we say, I want to be a council member of my word, then we have to have something in here that shows specifically how we're protecting the environment, and that isn't transit, because that's in transportation, okay? It's not mixed use housing or higher density, because that's different. That actually destroys the environment and removes some of the natural beauty and the reasons why a lot of people live in Sammamish. And this is a 20-year plan that's going to be reviewed in 5 and changed again in 10. And like you just said, it's going to have a new emphasis in 10 years, most likely. And it's like, so how do I have a plan that would match up, that moves us forward 10 years with obviously looking at the 20-year and then says, how about we can really be sustainable, but not just on a growth, but on fiscal and the environment? Because now I'm starting to see, if I see that in the plan, now it's starting to become balanced with taking into account that we have to plan for the state law and making the housing element be strong. So I don't disregard that. You and I have talked many times, and you on the council here too know fully well that I think we already have, the growth target was already manageable and could plan for it without the town center. So again, we're really close, but I just see,
So
there's no emphasis on, and a simple one on connectivity too, is put the wildlife corridors in. That's almost just a slam dunk, because it's, especially if it's just done along the rivers and streams and wetlands and parks that are currently existing right now in the city. Sorry. I'll get off my soapbox.
I hear what you're saying, and I think there is a way for us to go through it and try and make the environmental component, not the element anymore, but those policies that remain and that have been updated and refined, pop, really, to bring them to the surface.
Just even one more thing before you jump in there too. I mean, even in the goals, under the environmental part of the goals that we had for our vision, they don't talk about conservation and preservation. They talk about transportation and doing connectivity. And it's like, well, if I'm going to put concrete over it, it's really not preserving the environment. Even our goals, I agree with the vision, and I don't want to go changing the goals, but really, I'd shift a couple of the priorities and just put them down in another section. I have one vote for that, so that's not going to happen.
I'll just point out that in the previous comp plan, there was an element called environment and conservation. Most of those policies have been moved into an environmental stewardship section of the land use element. So it's almost like there's a sub-element to the land use element. And you're correct in that when you look at the table of contents, it's missing. It doesn't show up there. And perhaps direction from council could be to create it, pull that section out, or highlight it so it shows as a priority with the other items.
Yeah, because even your volume 2 or whatever it was on there, it's like all of a sudden, I'm looking down and I get to a map and there's the whole town center sitting there looking me in the face. And I'm like going, okay, that's great and that's well and good, but where's the balance to that? So, and that's not even going to initially be even a part of this. It comes later, the subplan. So so is the idea that we would do the environmental subplan later? Or are you saying we would do the environmental subplan right now and we could move that front and center and say, hey, this section is important to the resident? 90%. You guys have looked at the data and the surveys, and
it's already in there, is what we're saying. We just need to bring it to the front. It's a big document, right? So, we understand that turning every page and reading every word takes a lot of time. We've been looking at this thing for quite a while and have been building it for quite a while. So understand what I think I hear what you're saying here, and we'll definitely work on some concepts and bring them back to you all for direction.
Councilmember Lamb.
So I made a bunch of comments. I think, Evan, you probably saw that on Conveyo. As I was doing them, I kind of actually have to probably apologize for the number of comments that I put in that was all related to one topic. It ended up being a little stream of consciousness, and I couldn't delete the comments after I made them, nor could I edit them. So that's why they all kind of ended up being about one topic. But one thing I did want to mention, it does relate to what Councilmember Train said, is that when I was going through the comp plan, I was surprised that environmental stewardship was not its own element. And I did make a comment to that point to extract that and to make it its own element, and that things related to wildlife and wildlife corridors, while you can mention it in land use, it does belong in the section for environmental stewardship. And I do think it's important that we pull that out of land use.
Yeah, that's great feedback, and it's a it's a fine balance between the comp plan serving for the community and to go to as a place to become energized on a topic and read about things versus it serving as a compliance document for us to show as a city that we're compliant with state law. So there's that fine balance about including only elements that the state law requires versus starting to add elements that the city might optionally want to add. And generally speaking, and there is no real rule of thumb. The state isn't going to say, oh, you can't add 35 elements, but that's kind of bad form at that point, right? So we're trying to be mindful of the fact that there are a core list of elements that we have to have, and if we can include and integrate those into those elements in order to keep the structure of the plan kind of light, that's what we're trying to do. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that, and I've heard from both of you now, that this is a big enough topic for us that we likely want to reconsider whether this would be one of those rare instances where we would want to add it separate element or kind of call it out into a separate even sub element if there was a way for it to be very apparent what it was about.
I'd actually prefer if it was its own element, actually, and call it like what we did last year, which is fine. I was curious enough to take a look at what Issaquah was doing in their comp plan, their draft plan, as well as Redmond, and they both have elements for specifically environmental stewardship. So if anything, it would be consistent with our neighboring jurisdictions, and I hear that often, that we need to be consistent with our neighbors. The only other comment I had was on the housing target number, and I did ask this question in Conveo, is will there be any sort of acknowledgement, and we've heard about it, in our conversations about housing, is that we will likely have to build market rate in order to get the affordable units. And will there be any sort of language that acknowledges that in the comp plan?
So I would say you're right about having to build market in order to get affordable. However, that is not what 1220 directs us to do. And the guidance that is given to us by the State Department of Commerce does not require that we have to build market to get affordable. Instead, it merely requires that we have to demonstrate that we have the capacity, should money fall from the sky and a not-for-profit builder want to build the affordable housing, we simply have to show that we have the capacity for it to be built. So I want to be really clear that the city's adopted growth target, the CPP, King County Countywide Planning Policy adopted growth target, is the same number as our allocation. However, that is only by design from King County Affordable Housing Committee staff who designed a formula that benchmarked off of a growth target. There were other options that they did consider that were using different numbers that were not growth targets. And when I talked to those staff a few weeks ago about, well, why did we choose that? I remember those conversations. Their comment back to me was, well, if we had chosen those numbers, we'd be having a different but similar conversation about why are the numbers different. So, it is a perfectly imperfect system. And the best way to think about it is we have a growth target by which we are required to plan for delivery of services. Right? We need to make sure that as a city, we are setting our level of service, we have our capital facilities plan set, and that we have land capacity generally across the city to accommodate our growth target. That is one thing. That is more of the traditional sense of what we have to do. New with HB 1220 is a requirement that we have to demonstrate that we have capacity for a range of housing types in different affordability levels, and that all we have to do is show that we have capacity for it. We don't actually have to show anything really beyond that, and I think that it's a different effort. So, we've been very careful to identify that first and foremost, we meet our growth target planning requirements. Second, we have shown separately that we have capacity for mid-rise, because most of our affordability is in that deeper affordability range, which necessitates showing that we can accommodate mid-rise housing types. Now, question that's been asked, what happens if we grow too quickly and exceed our growth target? Well, in 5 years, we're going to start this process all over again. And the first thing we do is we look to see how well we have predicted and meshed up with our growth target. There are many cities that have grown faster. There are many cities that have grown slower. And for cities that grow faster, well, they might want to consider, and one of the next steps also that's going to be taken is PSRC is about to ramp up its Vision 2060 process. And as part of that, we get to go through this whole thing all over again, where we look at what geography category we're in, and maybe there'll be new categories this time. And Sammamish might not be in the same cohort of cities and towns as it was put in with the last vision. And if we're growing faster than what our growth target initially anticipated and what our urban geography anticipated, well, then that would be reason for PSRC to put us into a different group, or if we advocated for it. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that we've been fixated on this number, and the number is really just a benchmark. It's really something to work against, whether for planning for growth, for services, or for ensuring that we can accommodate a certain number of affordable units if funding all of a sudden were to be made available.
Okay, great. I just want to say thank you for considering all the comments that I had put in Conveo. I actually have more, but I'll just do it on that platform. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah. One, I want to point out that our first goal listed in the comp plan is preserving the natural environment. But in regards to having an environmental, sorry, I forget what the name, the environmental stewardship, it feels to me like the climate change and resiliency and the environmental stewardship, that those go very hand in hand. So I don't know if there would be, appetite from the council to have those things go together, right? Because if we're looking at preserving the environment, right, if we don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions, then all of the other efforts are for naught. And there are definitely areas there that might be easier to reconcile if they're in the same section, because, for example, as we look at climate change and resiliency, and we're looking at, for example, our tree canopy, we have some work we have to do to figure out where we can have the tree canopy and where we need to maintain that, because there are other areas where we may have to reduce it a bit because of the risk of fires, right? So as we look at climate change and resiliency and environmental stewardship, those two things can be in conflict if we don't make sure that they're working very hand in hand, because we're not going to save the trees if they all burn down, right? So we want to make sure that doesn't happen.
We definitely have a lot of work ahead of us with regard to the tree issue.
Right.
We have a a community that loves trees and
Yeah.
does a pretty good job about, based on the permit performance that we see, actually getting permits voluntarily, and the code requires it, but they're pulling permits and they're replanting trees. They're doing a great job. So I'd say your community here takes it very seriously to start with, but we've got some work to do understanding some of the challenges ahead. I want to point out, because I'm hearing something that we heard early in the process, the 45 meetings we've held so far on this topic, the comp plan. If you could flip to the future land use map, Jeff, the conversations we're hearing tonight are actually what led to our rethinking the future land use map. And we really I think, you know, some people say you can't do it all. We think that this map does it all. And what I mean by that is it allows for us to protect the neighborhoods, preserve the canopy, focus on repurposing existing outdated impervious surface with retrofit with stormwater by redeveloping the centers. It allows for different ranges of affordability and mid-rise in a center setting. It allows us to look at future growth and where to drive future growth in order to be more sustainable with transportation planning and invest wisely in transportation. What this map does is it paints a picture of the future of the city and where all of these things will go. And it addresses a lot of what we're hearing: environmental conservation. It addresses protection of the canopy. It addresses, protecting neighborhoods from impacts and separation from more intense development. It looks at making walkable communities that are places where you can get services. So this right here is something the city has not had in its generations of comprehensive plans. And this really will help us rallying around a vision of what we think the city should be going forward. It'll allow us to shape each of those sub areas. It will allow us to find connections on that really dicey stretch of road between Inglewood the Inglewood shopping area and the Pine Lake shopping area, where there's a lot of traffic, a lot of schools, a lot of things going on. We can plan for that, and we can start to look at the relationships between those areas and how to ultimately design that. There's all these things happening, and we've heard all of this, and we've really worked hard at trying to incorporate it into a vision for the city. And if anything out of this comp plan that I'm really proud of is if we end up there, we're not still adopted yet, but this future land use map represents a major shift in thinking in the city about how we plan for our future.
No, I love that. I was just thinking that in my head, and maybe it's just scarier in my head, when I think of environmental stewardship and sustainability and climate change, to me, those are all kind of one big topic. Looking at that environmental stewardship section, nothing jumped out at me that was lost from 2015. I think it was just moved. But obviously trees are a huge part of our ability to combat climate change. But again, what kind of trees, where do they have to be? That is changing, and that resiliency, environmental stewardship and climate resiliency, those are things we've really got to do together so that we get that right mix and that right combination for the long term. I just appreciate that. And I think I'm comfortable where it is, but I'm also, appreciative if people feel like it needs more emphasis. I worry that if it gets its own section, that those two sections could be in conflict if we're not careful. Thanks.
Councilmember O'Farrell.
Thank you, Mayor. David, thank you so much for all the information you provided. I eagerly watched Planning Commission meetings over the summer break, and particularly the July 25th was a really great meeting. You all need to watch it. It was really great. David, you explained at that meeting very, very succinctly, and for those of us who need it at a fifth grader level, the difference between the growth target and the housing allocation, and you explained it very, very well, and that kind of light bulb moments I was having. So thank you so much for all that great information. I would have to, listening to this conversation, I would tend to concur with Councilmember Treen and Councilmember Lamb about the environmental stewardship and maybe taking a look at pulling that out. I do remember in our current comp plan, throughout it, they used like a little leaf symbol throughout the whole plan denoting when a policy was in line with environmental stewardship. And maybe that's something that and maybe you already have it in here because I haven't fully gone through all of the volumes, but that was something that went, and it's a very, it's in the old hard copy form, and there was just white paper and they just used a little green leaf, so it's easy to stand out. This is a much more colorful document, but maybe if there's some way of doing that also, kind of recalling different policies throughout the document, how it relates to environmental stewardship possibly. And I'm so glad that you came back to the future land use map. We've never had one of these before as a city, and I agree with you. I think this map is everything. This is going to help us direct the city in a much more, for me, in a visual fashion, also to kind of see where we believe things could go in the future and help direct all the things that we were just talking about tonight, but where the trails would go, how would we connect everything to everybody? How can we walk from here to there, and where is that all going to happen? So having this future land use map is going to be an amazing tool for all of us. So thank you for all your hard work, and I will continue to read this document. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things that I do realize in hearing the comments, and I really appreciate the feedback on this, is there's a lot of effort by request from the state being put into housing, and consequently a lot of the graphics that are in here are trying to attempt to explain what the state is asking us or requiring us to do. And we may have opportunity in addition to creating possibly a standalone element, but also adding some additional graphics that are trying to convey what we're trying to achieve from the environmental stewardship side of things, because it strikes me that we may not have as many graphics related to that, which doesn't help pull that to the surface and emphasize it as much. And that might be one of the reasons why it's kind of riding in the background for many readers.
I was going to get an opportunity to, Councilmember Gupta, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, just really briefly, we have the vision element matrix, and you can see that almost every element is strongly related or moderately related under that matrix. So like you're saying, maybe just a way to, as you're going through the plan and you're 100 pages past that matrix, just remind us all that, hey, this really is really strongly related, and this is how. So this policy is really drawing back to that. I know that's mentioned through text a lot of times as we go through each vision. It says, hey, this relates to these three pieces of our goals, but just something more visual, because if our community is like me, the words start to blur together a little bit as you get down to chapter 6.
Well, thank you, Council. The other thing I was going to ask for is Jeff, if you needed any more direction, if you wanted to flip through any that you want Council direction on, we could provide that feedback right now so that you get it.
Okay, great. So the first one was the
adequate
recommendation
separation, right, between higher density development and, yeah,
And
that was explained, I think, a bit by David. Did you get, okay, I don't know if there was feedback on this, though, per se. It sounds like it's a balancing act to try to not overshadow neighborhoods, and yet you can't have a barrier. So I think we get it, that it's a balance, and that we need to figure out how to make it work.
The city has not traditionally had transition areas like most cities do between differing levels of density or intensity. So that would generally be for what we're dealing with. And this is pre-HB 1110. So what I'm talking about is post-HB 1110. It would generally be between the neighborhood residential, the urban residential, and the other sub areas or other higher intense categories than that. So you'd be generally providing a separation on. So the other challenge is that, well, which property is required to do it, because land is valuable. So you'd generally be providing the protection to the neighborhood residential on the urban residential, and you'd be providing the protection to the neighborhood residential and urban residential from the sub areas or the commercial business or whatever what's the other land use designation on that land, if you will. So if you wanted us to create a policy that directs us to do that, to provide adequate separation between higher density land use designations, then we could do that, which would then prompt us to, as Jeff said, write regulatory plan to do so.
Are there head nods on that? Or do you want to think about it more? Looking for head nods or shaking heads. Okay, there's not agreement on this.
I think I'd like to hear some more about it. I know we've received public comment on this issue. So I just feel like we should hear a little bit more. I would need to hear a little bit more about it. I mean, I understand we have the limitations of all these new house builds that have come down since the previous comp plan, but I think I would like to see what's the possibility within the confines of these new laws.
Jeff, I don't know if you have any feedback or anything wise to offer.
Yeah, sure. So I think the way that it would have to be structured would be when one zone abuts another zone, or potentially a group of zones abuts another group of zones or land use categories. And that way it's not tied to what actually gets developed. It applies to everyone equally. So I think that's one thing. And really we'd be looking at, in terms of the code, perhaps a greater separation. So basically a bigger setback. And then maybe some landscaping. The other thing to think about, though, is particularly in the R1 zone, those properties actually already have a larger setback. I think in some cases it's 20 or 25 feet. And so there can be some regulations that speak to the notion that those that are developing larger properties that abut lower intense or higher intensity zones also could cite their development to minimize those particular impacts. So I think as long as we don't say, if it's a middle housing development, you have to meet X, and if it's a single family, you have to meet Y, and just simply develop the standards where you have a one zone or designation abutting another assigned designation or zone, then I think we'd be okay with the state limitations.
Yeah, I would just like to hear a bit more about it, because it's the one recommendation that came from the Planning Commission, and I would really like to kind of hear that out and see what the possibilities are. And there was, public comment about that issue at the Planning Commission meetings too. So I don't want to dismiss direction from the Planning Commission and those who attended and gave up their time to come and give those comments, and not fully develop and see what the possibilities are.
So we may need to come back with that one. What's the next one that you need direction on?
Okay, let me.
Sorry. I was going to move ahead. Just say, add policy for citywide inclusionary requirement. What do we think? Are we nodding our heads? I see general nod heading nodding, heads nodding. You got that?
Okay.
Are we good?
Got it.
Go.
We're good.
Next.
No. Oh, sorry. There's one.
Go add policies.
Yep.
I'm frustrating you, Jeff. You go ahead and talk. It's fine. On capital facilities and utilities.
Thank you. So this was a suggestion that came up in the Convio feedback to add a policy in the capital facilities and utilities element to encourage movement towards low carbon energy sources, incorporating new and advancing technologies to reduce overall demand and enhance service to the community.
Where are we at? Head nods? Okay, good to go. Next.
Look, that one's directly in line with the cap as well, so that's pretty easy for us.
Completely agree. And that was it.
Very good.
Deputy Mayor.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no worries. On the separation one, if you just put ped and bike trails in between, you can have your separation. Just throwing that out there.
It's particularly challenging because ultimately when you results in regulation, the geometry constraint that presents will make a project viable or not viable. So it may work for some, but not for others. So we want to be really mindful when we do something like that, because it will basically, what we're hearing is make housing easier to accommodate. And then we're going to add something back that makes it harder to accommodate. I do understand the separation desire and the desire to protect people from different intensities and new development and all that. Completely respect that. We just have to work on what the solutions might be.
No, and on a more serious note, I think it's really important that, at least from my perspective, and I don't know if the rest of council agrees, that it's one thing to say we have the capacity to build affordable housing. I believe we are all very dedicated to doing more than just penciling in some capacity. We want policies that actually encourage the ability to have more affordable housing. So to that end, I very much appreciate what you're saying, is that striking that balance to say we don't want to get overly heavy-handed in how we do this, because we could end up without having the desired effects. And if we look at the data, right, we have decreasing enrollments in our elementary schools. We have decreasing demographics in the 18 to 35-year-olds. Those numbers are telling us something. We need, these other types of housing and more affordable housing. We have, we need 1 million housing units built in the state of Washington in the coming years. We have half of all people say that they can't afford the housing that they have. So we have to really focus on that. So thank you.
Okay, and I think I'll just add one last comment about the debate about the environmental impact. I actually think in some ways the land use map is the environmental impact statement for the city in a way, because it's showing how we are keeping our development and ourselves within our GMA boundary and allowing, we're not spreading out beyond our borders. And so part of this is education, I think, for residents as they look at this and see environment is related to density. It is preserving our environment by having density in a controlled setting.
I think you just filled out the SEPA checklist for us, so thank you.
No problem. Happy to do it. Okay. So if we're good, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I just want to point out that we are taking the plan, the housing element, the draft housing element, to the King County Affordable Housing Committee, the King County Growth Management Planning Council Affordable Housing Committee later this week. And if you wanted to watch that meeting, I believe that is, yep, listed right here, 2 to 3:30 on Thursday. So we look forward to hearing from them. So far, we have received positive feedback, some minor comments, but generally speaking, most cities have received pretty harsh feedback, and we're feeling very good about not receiving harsh feedback from the county. So that puts us in a good place.
Thank you. To continue on with, I believe it's old business. It's the 2025 Kokanee Work Group Annual Budget and Work Plan. And I'm not sure who's presenting.
Give us a second, Deputy Mayor, to transition folks online. We've got the Public Works team. I believe that Stephanie, the Stormwater Planning Manager, is going to be the presenter, and I believe Audrey will be online as well.
Great, thank you.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council. I believe Scott may have introduced us. I lost a little bit as we were transitioning to present this evening, but just for the record, Audrey Starcy, I'm the Director of Public Works. I am joined this evening by Greg Stematio, our Deputy Director of Public Works, as well as Stephanie Sullivan, our Senior Stormwater Program Manager. So we briefly provided Council with an overview of the Plan 2025 budget for the Kokanee Work Group in July of this year. And since then, there have been a few changes to that proposed budget. So Stephanie Sullivan has a short presentation and then a quick discussion for you this evening. So Stephanie, whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Good evening, Council, Mr. City Manager. Stephanie Sullivan, Senior Stormwater Program Manager. So tonight is the brief update on the Kokanee Work Group 2025 budget options. On July 2nd, previously staff presented to City Council and Council authorized budget option 3, which provided $76,745 for Kokanee operations in 2025. Subsequently, and somewhat unexpectedly, the Kokanee Work Group Management Committee majority did vote for option 4 of the budget, which would increase Sammamish's share to $87,717 for 2025. The reason we're here tonight is because our interlocal agreement with the Kokanee Work Group requires unanimous consent when the budget options are 10% increased from the prior year, which all of the options are this year. So our request tonight is that you authorize budget option 4, increasing the 2025 financial support by the city by $10,972. And I'll point out that the change between options 3 and 4 is for new services on communication and outreach. So a majority of the member jurisdictions felt it was valuable and important to include these services, and so elected option 4. So with that, I'll answer questions and request authorization for budget option 4.
Thank you. And council? Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell.
My full title again.
That's the whole thing. I love saying it.
Really, I don't really have too much to say in it other than, I support the work that we're doing for the restoration of the Kokanee. And whereas I don't love an increase in budget, I can't see how I could not be in favor of this and in favor of the work that they're doing. I do love that they want to spend additional money on communication and outreach, and I think that has been, to some degree, a missing piece to the approach with restoring the Kokanee to the lake. So, again, I don't love to see increases in budgets, but I couldn't say no to this one, so I will be supporting this.
Anyone else? Councilmember Treen.
Yeah, so I'll move to adopt option 4 and the proposed increase.
Second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Just want to say that one of the things that the Kokanee Work Group and even the ILA management group discussed was the fact that due to the fact that we are not having the kind of successes that we need, we have to act. There are going to be changes in what they're doing, and then it's the why are you doing it, and that's the part that needs to be communicated out to specific communities around the lake, and so that there's a cost to that that would be handled in-house. So I would be supporting it.
Okay. All those in favor? So, sorry, didn't see. Councilmember Gupta.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly. At the KWG meeting, I think we also discussed, I think there is an appetite, as Councilmember Treen mentioned, for greater action so that we do get the returns that we're hoping for. And it was identified that a lot of those actions are very expensive and very challenging, and so it almost necessitates working with private property owners. And so, as Councilmember Treen pointed out, both then and tonight, communication has to be a piece of it. I think they made specific mention of invasive weeds and milfoil, and one that's getting in people's way. So they want to remove it, but when they remove it, they might just cut it, which causes it to spread and makes the problem worse. So people want to do the right thing. They're also incentivized to do the right thing because it is impacting their ability to enjoy their property and the lake. But KWG has identified that we're finding a way to talk to them better is hopefully going to be part of a broader pivot in strategy.
Okay, thank you for that, and I hope that measurement of those communications is also part of that. Now, any other comments? Okay, if not, then we're ready to take a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
On to new business. And I see that Vicki is already in the hot seat, ready to present. So we're going to have Vicki Carlson and Chris Giannini going through the Budgeting 101 for us. Thank you.
And I'll need just a minute here to get the PowerPoint set up. somewhere there's a share button here. Sharing this. Aha, I think I'm in business here. All right, so for those of you who might not know me yet, I am Vicki Carlson, the Finance Director, and I'm joined here with Chris Giannini, our Deputy Finance Director, and we're gonna be tag teaming this presentation. Given the hour, we will go through this relatively quickly to leave enough time to answer questions at the end. So tonight, this is one of the first sessions of several sessions that we will have to review the 2025-2026 biennial budget and the 2025-2030 Capital Improvement Program, or CIP. Tonight is not about the numbers. Tonight, we want to review the philosophy and the best practices that were followed during development of both the biennial budget as well as the CIP. We're going to be going over the schedule for when you will receive the details of the budget, which is the numbers, which I know you all eager to get. In preparation for being presented with the budget starting next week, we do want to take the time to walk you through the budgetary funds that we have and why we have as many funds as we do. That's the accounting part of the budget process that we do need to follow. And we're going to be walking you through what you can expect to receive for both the GFOA budget and CIP documents, which will be a little bit new this year. So the budget that you'll be given is a plan that focuses our revenue and our staff on accomplishing specific goals and objectives for the next 2 years. So with that said, this biennial budget process has been drafted differently than in past years. Previously, budgets contained a lot of what-ifs, which substantially inflated the budgets, and it muddied the true financial landscape of the city. So when the budget process kicked off earlier this year, departments were given instructions to draft their budgets to reflect current level of service, including any necessary inflationary increases. We are no longer including in the budget the what-ifs or the unknown, unplanned costs, which would result, hopefully, in a more realistic budget. You may remember back in June, I came to you and spoke about this change, and this change means that this is a partnership between staff and council. So staff has worked very hard to strip out of the budgets those unplanned items, but what it means is if one of those unplanned items does materialize and there's costs associated it, we're gonna be coming to you for a budget amendment. Given the changes to how the budget has been drafted, the underspending you've seen in the past is not going to be realized going forward. As part of this first phase, we've also started reviewing what funds we currently utilize for budgeting purposes. And one change you're going to be seeing going forward is with the general fund. So the goal is to turn the general fund into the main operating fund of the city and capture the daily operating costs of the city plus needed transfers to other funds. Currently, the general fund includes significant costs associated with pavement preservation as well as some traffic projects. Starting next year, though, these projects are going to be counted for in the street fund rather than the general fund. Making this transition is going to create transparency into the costs of these programs and also what subsidy is needed from the general fund to fully fund the pavement management in these traffic projects. It's also going to make it easier to understand the full cost of daily operations for the city, because these high-cost pavement preservation programs won't be commingled with the public works operational expenditures. And I do want to say that having a pavement preservation in its own fund is very common accounting practice for other cities, so we're lining up with what a lot of other cities are already doing. So once we had draft budgets from the departments, we did go through an exercise of identifying one-time revenues and one-time expenditures and split them out from the ongoing part of the budget. Splitting out the ongoing from the one-time allows us to see the trajectory much more clearly in the general fund, and when ongoing revenues are no longer going to pay for ongoing expenditures. Given the trajectory that we saw, we did go back to departments and we made additional reductions. We'll be covering those details of those changes when we get to the operational budget in 2 weeks. Another aspect of the budget that we did take a look at is fund balances in some of our other funds. So we already have a policy on ending fund balance requirements for the general fund and for the surface water fund, but we took a closer look at the fund balance requirements for our capital project funds, where most of our CIP projects are accounted for, as well as equipment rental, IT, and in risk. And in some instances, we have made trains to transfers into these funds in order to right-size those fund balances. When you get the funds for review in a couple weeks, we will review these changes we've made to fund balances. So this is really just a heads up that these changes are coming. So again, we talked about this June, but it's a good reminder to talk about why these changes to the budget process were made. We wanted to build greater transparency into the budget numbers, and we wanted to align the budget process with current best practices. So when we talk about the CIP program next week, you're not only going to see the budget related to the CIP projects for the next 2 years, but you're also going to see the planned projects and project costs for the following 4 years. So you're going to see a total picture of 6 years. And hopefully this will help you understand how the decisions that are being made during this budget process is going to affect the decisions that you can and can't make in the next budget process. And I also want to say, as important as building transparency into the budget is, these changes are also just as important to move towards long-term financial sustainability. So again, tonight's a bit of budgeting 101. Next week, you're going to be receiving the CIP, which will include the surface water capital projects. It'll include all of the capital project funds and the capital portion for equipment rental and IT. So you'll see the entire CIP in one session. Then on September 17th, we will come back and review the operational budget. The operational budget is mainly the general fund, but it also includes the operational components of equipment rental, IT, and risk, and then the surface water operations and maintenance. On October 1st, and we'll talk about this a little later on, we will get the full budget and CIP documents. This is a change from past years. October is also when you will receive department budget presentations. Right now, they're slated for October 8th and October 15th. November is when the public hearings for both the budget and the property tax levy occur, and we're targeting budget adoption right now for November 19th. And just as a reminder, we do have to have a budget adopted by the end of the year, or we can't legally spend funds next year. So in preparation of getting the numbers in the next couple of weeks, just want to take an opportunity to review the funds that we have that are going to make up the total budget, because you're going to be inundated with a lot of information in a short amount of time. So the general fund is the main operating fund of the city, and it's going to be used to account for daily operations for the city, plus transfers into other funds as needed. Transfers are made to the capital project funds when dedicated revenues are not enough to cover the full cost of the project. And transfers are also made to the equipment rental, IT, and risk for both operational and capital requirements. So for the general fund, main source of revenues are taxes, including property and sales tax, fees and charges, and contributions. And as a reminder, property tax is the single largest revenue source and is limited to a 1% increase every year. As I mentioned earlier, pavement preservation will be accounted for in the street fund beginning in 2025. So we do have several capital project funds, one fund for each major program area. So going forward, we'll have streets, general government, which is facilities, parks, and transportation. CIP projects are primarily for asset acquisition, development, and major maintenance of these assets. There's no daily operating costs captured in any of these funds. We do have a handful of dedicated revenue sources for these projects, but again, what these revenue sources don't cover in the project costs, it's made up for with transfers from the general fund. And just a note, the revenues that are listed on this slide, most of them are restricted to specific uses, so they cannot be just transferred to the general fund for daily operations. So in addition to our capital project funds, we do have 3 internal service funds. These are funds that act like a business, but the only customer is the city. Funding for these funds comes from the general fund and the surface water fund, and transfers are proportionate to services received by these 2 funds, typically allocated by an FTE count. The IT fund does have one dedicated funding source, and that's the technology fee. An additional change that we are planning for, but not until the 2027-2028 biennium, will be to fold the risk and the IT funds into the general fund. We're making this change to create better accountability as well as transparency for both of these two functions. But we have to wait until 2027 because we have to collect data points so we know how to allocate those budgets among the departmental budgets. So we'll be collecting the data points the next year or so, coming back to you in the next biennial budget and folding these two back into the general fund. Again, it's very common to have both IT and risk as part of the general fund as they are considered daily operating costs. And then finally, we have two funds for surface water, one for maintenance and operations, one for capital. These funds act like a business, but have many customers, not just the city. Funding primarily comes from user fees, grants, and interest. And as a side note, this is really important from an accounting perspective. Enterprise funds, in our case, the surface water fund, cannot subsidize the general fund. So it's very important to account for how much is actually being generated by being received by that fund. So the general fund doesn't subsidize. And then the last slide before I turn this over to Chris is this is just a visual to show you the funds we have and the separation between what we refer to as the government side of the house and the enterprise side of the house. You can kind of think of these as two houses right next to each other with a fence between the two and a gate that opens when they need to cross. Otherwise, there's a fence between the two separating the two. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for the next section.
Okay, next we're going to move on to the documents that you're going to receive in conjunction with this new budget process. One of these documents, the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, an acronym you'll probably hear a lot, focuses on the 25 and 26 biennial budget, while the other document takes a 6-year look at the capital improvement plan. The GFOA offers an award program that encourages preparation of a budget that is more than just the numbers. Our own GFOA budget document has been submitted for and received the GFOA award every biennium beginning with 2003 to 2004. Historically, this GFOA budget has been prepared after the council has already adopted the numbers-only budget. It is distributed to the council. I don't know if you read it or not, but it has been distributed in past years. For the 25-26 biennium, we're introducing a preliminary budget that follows the GFOA criteria guide to give council and the public a better understanding of the budget and the budget process. It's not about winning the award, but documenting a budget process that conforms with high standards and current best practices. The GFOA budget includes what, it's numbers and charts, as well as why. It's narrative explanations. It covers a brief history and the character of the city, financial policies, explains the revenue sources available to the city, as well as council goals and how the budget is designed to help achieve these goals. A 6-year financial forecast is also part of the GFOA budget. Previous budget documents can be viewed on our website. In addition to the budget, this will be the first time that you will be presented with a full 6-year capital improvement plan outlining projects and funding. The CIP is adopted by is guided by adopted long-range plans like the Transportation Improvement Plan, the TIP, and the Stormwater Improvement Plan, the SWIP. Do we have enough acronyms now? We can go on. The first 2 years of the CIP are included in the budget, with the next 4 years giving us an understanding of what future needs are. I do want to say that the CIP is not a document that once it's adopted, it's set in stone. It's a planning tool that will change as the city's needs and evolve and funding availability changes. The document itself will have summaries by fund along with descriptions and costs for every project included in the CIP. This should give you a good understanding of our ongoing asset management responsibilities. This is a sample of one of the CIP projects. You will see the project name along with a summary description at the top right. In the middle will be the justification and the benefits of the project. In the bottom half of the project page will show you the project costs for each year, along with how the project is funded. Now I'll turn it back to Vicki for a wrap-up.
So I will say this is one of the shortest presentations I will be giving on this budget process. The remainder will be much longer. So just some final thoughts to leave you with tonight. We will be continuing the conversation on both the budget and the CIP over the next few months. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions you have. Any questions you can give us ahead of time just enables us to respond in a timely manner and keep the budget process moving forward. We will continue to reach out with you throughout this process. And finally, once you receive the budget, if there is a desire to discuss amending the budget after it's been presented to you, we do need to follow best practices and ensure that we continue down the path toward fiscal sustainability. In order to do that, we really need to talk about if there's a budget amendment you want to consider. We need to consider the impact of that change to the rest of the budget, how that affects it. And we're also going to need to identify either a funding source to cover it or what reductions will be made elsewhere. We can no longer simply add an amendment without addressing the impacts to the budget. I leave you with this as context to keep in mind for when you start seeing the numbers over the next 2 weeks. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Council. Actually, I'll say that I'm delighted to see something that is 6 years in planning, because it is the only way to get perspective on what's going on. And I'm going to hold you to that accountability statement you made, that when we make a suggestion of something we want, that we have to figure out how we're going to pay for that and how much it's going to cost, to do so. And what's, robbing Peter to pay Paul, I know we can't do that. So I'm looking forward to you holding us to that.
Yeah, and I will say that that'll be our job, right? When you come forward with a possible amendment, we will go back to the drawing board and figure out how to make that work. Good. And what those implications are.
If there's no other comments, then we will release you into the night.
Thank you.
We are now going, I believe, to Carrie. Are you leading this, or is it you?
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, Mike is going to walk us through this really quickly. Carrie and I are here to answer any questions, but I think this one's pretty straightforward, so I'll turn it over to Mike.
Yes, thank you, Scott, and good evening, Council. Mike Sugg, Supervising Management Analyst in the City Manager's Office. This item provides time for Council to consider 2 changes to its rules of procedure, one dealing with a new social media policy, and the second revising the procedures for remote public comment. In response to a recent U.S. Supreme Court case regarding government social media liability, MRSC has issued guidance to its member cities recommending that they create social media policies for elected officials to ensure that personal and official posts are clearly delineated. The proposed social media policy in Section 2.15 of your rules would establish these guidelines. The intent is to ensure consistent messaging, as well as to improve transparency and reduce potential liability by clarifying personal versus official communications. It also describes that only city-run platforms can represent the official city position, and it encourages council members to label their personal accounts accordingly. The second proposed change to council's rules is contained in section 4.3.11. Since the unfortunate Zoom bombing incident last December, the city has implemented a pre-registration process for those wishing to comment remotely. As we know, this process has been very effective in preventing further meeting disruptions. The proposed amendments to your rules provide more time for the public to submit requests for remote comment. For a regular city council meeting, the deadline would move back by 2 hours from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. for them to submit that request. And for a special meeting, commenters would have an additional half hour to submit a request. It will also reduce confusion by making the remote public comment deadline the same as the deadline for submitting written public comments. So just a little bit of a procedural cleanup edit there. And with that said, and that quick introduction, we're happy to answer any questions, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to the Deputy Mayor.
So, Council, questions? Concerns? Would anybody like to consider making a motion to amend the city's council rules of procedure?
I move that we amend the city council rules and procedures as presented.
Is there a second?
A second.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mike.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, council.
You know, it's only 10 and I'm getting the hang of this now. So we've managed to fight our way through new business, which I'm excited about. And now we're getting to council reports and city manager's reports. So city manager, would you like to kick off?
Sure. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Appreciate that. I want to welcome everyone back after the summer break. And just a quick reminder that school is back in session. So I would encourage everyone to drive a little slower, have a little bit more patience, maybe leave a skosh earlier than maybe you have been during the summer to account for, in particular, as we know in our community, the peak drop-off and pickup times for school. Following up on Vicky's presentation about the budget, we've been doing public outreach on the budget with the community. We've been at the farmers market. Tomorrow will be our third time at the farmers market, where folks can come up and use a city buck and decide where they want to spend it as part of getting input as part of budget outreach that we've been doing over the summer. So please come out and join us at the farmers market tomorrow and cast your city bucks. I want to also follow up on the proclamation earlier this evening on Welcoming Week. Welcoming Week for Sammamish will be September 13th through 22nd. And as part of that, we will be at the farmers market on September 18th. We will have a booth there, and my laptop just turned off on me, which I had Mike's wonderful notes. So bear with me 1 second. There we go. As part of Welcoming Week, we will join with our community partners, the Sammamish Chamber, the YMCA, and the Sammamish Library for special events with cultural performances and activities, booths featuring multicultural nonprofits, and an array of delicious food vendors featuring cuisine from around the world. So that will be Wednesday, September 18th, and that is part of our Welcoming Week program. And with that, one last thing as we kick off the fall, I want to remind that it is Coffee with Council this Saturday. So please come join. I believe I have Mayor Clark, Councilmember Lamb, and Councilmember O'Farrell, unless that changes. So please come out and join. Please come out and join at Met Market on Saturday morning if you want to come chat with council members. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Deputy Mayor.
Great. And if I would love to have some council reports. And so, Councilmember Stewart.
Yes, following with the budget theme, we have been quite busy over at Eastside Fire and Rescue on the Finance and Administration Committee. Just like the presentation that we got tonight from our lovely staff. At the end of June, we got a similar presentation from the Eastside Fire and Rescue leadership team. In July, we then got a first look at the bottom line of the budget, but not the detailed budget numbers for each of the areas. But we went through a little bit more about what the different makeup of each of those budget areas was going to be. The bottom line was a little bit larger than we all expected it to be, and I think there was very clear feedback to the Eastside Fire and Rescue leadership that we needed a lot more detail, and we needed to understand where we had policy decisions that we could make that would impact the budget. A few key pieces of information for you all as we move forward. Decisions from prior years on the EFR board added programs and paid for those programs with surpluses in those years, but those are now impacting our contribution. So when those programs were initially implemented, they didn't have an impact on our contribution because they were able to use fund balances. Prior years have also used fund balances to pay for the CPIW increases And so we're going to see a much bigger increase in our contribution to cover salary costs this time around. And some examples of the funds that were used to pay for those CPIW increases include the Equipment Replacement Fund and the Capital Improvement Fund. And as the saying goes, at some point we will have to pay said piper. So we will be seeing a little bit of that in the upcoming budget. Just because it's so much fun, I have 3 more FAC meetings this month to continue to dive into the details and understand, again, what options we need to present as the Finance Committee to the EFR Board in terms of policy and service decisions that could have a meaningful impact on the budget. I will continue to bring back updates to you all as we have more information. And I want to give a special shout out to Vicki and Scott for their partnership on this, because we've also gotten to spend a lot of quality time together talking about this very fun subject. So if there are any questions, feel free to ask now or follow up with me later. I'd be happy to share more information.
Thank you. And Councilmember Roisin O'Farrell.
Oh, a woman could get used to that. Thank you so much. I just wanted to bring Council up to date with a training program that Councilmember Gupta, myself, and Councilmember Stewart have been involved with. It's called the WASELI, which is it's the very first year that the Association of Washington Cities have brought a cohort of elected leaders from communities around the state of Washington. So we have different cities joining us, like Auburn, East Wenatchee, Pullman, Union Gap, Ording, Chelan, Duval, Squim, etc. are all involved in this. It's a it's made up of 5 sessions. It's made up of 15 teams of elected representatives from all over Washington state. The goal is to work with expert facilitators to develop collaborative leadership skills. Also to help local electives embrace differing viewpoints and build consensus. Also learning about the different challenges that different communities around the state are facing, and what we're coming to find out is that the challenges are very much the same. They're just on different scales. Our sessions alternate between in-person and virtual, and we have had 2 so far. We have another 3 to come. They have been really engaging, useful, energetic. It's been wonderful getting to know all of our counterparts around the state. Also, we had Deputy Mayor of Tacoma is there, people from Liberty Lake, Airway Heights, Burien. So it's been very educational. We'll keep you abreast of what we're learning. If anyone wants to get to know more, happy to have coffee with anyone who'd like to hear a little bit more about this cohort. But it's been a lot of fun and very educational. And we hope to bring all that experience back to Council. So thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Anything for good of the order? If not, I would entertain a motion to cease operations right.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Good night, everybody.